Hey everyone, tonight we are hacking our way through the dense, suffocating embrace of the West African interior to uncover a secret that nature has tried very hard to keep. We aren't looking for gold, and we aren't looking for stone temples that have been meticulously cleared by archaeologists with toothbrushes. We are looking for a ghost story of civilization that didn't build on the earth, but built with it, constructing impossible skylines out of living timber and roots. You are standing at the edge of the Ghanaian rainforest, staring into a wall of green that looks thick enough to stop. A tank about to step into a mystery that challenges everything we think we know about ancient engineering. Let's be honest, though, with the humidity hovering around 99% and the local insect population viewing you as an all-you-can-eat buffet, you probably wouldn't survive 20 minutes out here without a medevac chopper on standby. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you re-watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how global this campfire circle has become. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't the view, it's the air. It's heavy, wet, and smells intensely of decay and frantic growth. You are trekking through the hinterlands of Ghana, far off the paved roads that lead to the coastal forts or the bustling markets of Accra. Here, the world is a monochromatic assault of emerald and jade. You take a step, and your boot sinks 2 inches into a slurry of decomposing leaves and red earth. It's a sucking sound, a wet thwack that accompanies every single movement, setting the rhythm for a hike that feels less like walking and more like wading through hot soup. You wipe the sweat from your forehead, but it's a futile gesture. The humidity here doesn't just make you sweat, it condenses on you. You are effectively wearing the atmosphere. You adjust the strap of your pack, which feels like it's gained 10 pounds in the last hour, and look ahead at the guide's back. He's moving with an annoying fluidity, slipping between vines and massive ferns while you stumble over protruding roots that seem to be actively trying to trip you. It's easy to see why this part of the world has kept its secrets for so long. The jungle is aggressive. It reclaims everything. If you dropped your phone here, within a week, it would be covered in moss. Within a month, it would be part of a tree. We are searching for the green horizon, a term that appears in fragmented colonial diaries and oral histories of the region, referring to a series of structures that were allegedly indistinguishable from the forest itself until you were standing right on top of them. Mainstream history tells us that the great empires of West Africa, like the Ashanti or the Mali Empire further north, utilized mudbrick, timber, and adobe for their architectural marvels. These materials were perfect for the climate, breathable, cool, and readily available. But the legend you're chasing suggests a divergence, a splinter group of engineers who decided that dead wood was inferior to living wood. As you push aside a fern the size of a dinner table, a ray of sunlight manages to pierce the triple canopy ceiling above. It illuminates a swarm of insects dancing in the humid air. You swat at them lazily. This is the reality of exploration. It's mostly just bug bites and cardio. But then, the terrain begins to change. The ground, previously flat and swampy, starts to angle upward. It's subtle at first, just a gentle incline that burns your calves, but soon you are scrambling up a slope that feels unnaturally steep. You grab onto a vine for support, always checking for ants first, of course, and haul yourself up a ridge. The trees here are ancient. We're talking about giants, the Ceiba pentandra, or silkotan trees, with buttress roots that flare out like rocket fins, standing taller than a 10-story building. In local folklore, these trees are often considered the dwelling places of spirits, sacred entities that must be respected. Cutting one down without the proper rituals is asking for a curse, or at the very least, some very bad luck. It's a convenient superstition if you're trying to protect a forest, but as you're about to find out, there might be a more practical origin to that reverence. You reach the crest of the ridge and look out. This is it, the green horizon. At first glance, it looks like a rolling mountain range covered in unbroken jungle. Your eyes slide over it, looking for patterns, for the hard angles of human intervention. You don't see any. It looks like nature doing what nature does best, chaos. But then, you squint. You shield your eyes against the glare. You look at the silhouette of the mountains against the bright sky. They aren't random. The peaks are too rhythmic. The slopes are uniform, rising at a consistent 45-degree angle. These aren't geological formations formed by tectonic uplift or volcanic activity. They are pyramids, massive, silent green pyramids standing in a precise line, completely engulfed by the vegetation. It's a sight that makes your brain stutter for a second. You're used to the beige limestone of Giza or the gray stone of Mesoamerica. You aren't used to monuments that look like they are breathing. Historians still argue whether early aerial surveys of this region in the mid-20th century simply dismissed these shapes as natural Inselberg-sisolated rock hills, or if the data was deliberately suppressed to avoid the logistical nightmare of excavating a site that is technically alive. It's a fair debate. How do you excavate a building when the building is the forest? If you cut away the vines, you might be cutting away the load-bearing walls. You check your GPS, you are miles from the nearest village. The silence here is heavy, broken only by the call of a hornbill and the constant low-frequency buzz of the insect kingdom. You take a drink of warm water from your canteen, trying to process the scale of what is in front of you. The structure nearest to you must be 300 feet tall at the apex. It dwarfs the trees surrounding it. It's not just a pile of dirt. The angles are too sharp. Underneath that chaotic layer of leaves and creepers, there is a skeleton. The guide motions for you to keep moving. You descend the ridge, sliding half the way down on the slick mud, and approach the base of the first great structure. As you get closer, the illusion of a mountain vanishes, and the reality of the bioengineering becomes apparent. The ground here is uneven, rippled with massive subterranean veins. You realize you are walking on top of a root system so extensive it feels like a highway network. You stop to catch your breath and look at the wall rising before you. It's not stone, it's not brick. It is a wall of interlocking trunks, roots, and vines, fused together in a pattern that looks chaotic from a distance, but reveals a frightening intelligence up close. It looks like a basket weave, but on a titanic scale, woven by giants. There is a fringe theory, often whispered about in cryptogeology circles, that suggests this civilization didn't collapse due to war or famine, but simply went back to the roots, literally merging their society so seamlessly with the ecology that they became invisible to the Western eye. Standing here, looking at this living fortress, that theory doesn't seem so crazy. You reach out and touch the wall. The bark is rough, cool to the touch. It feels solid, like concrete, but there is a hum to it, the vibration of millions of gallons of water rushing through the xylem and phloem, hidden deep within the wood. This isn't a ruin. Ruins are dead. Ruins are silent. This thing is alive. You look up, craning your neck until it hurts. The canopy of the pyramid sways slightly in the wind. It's camouflage perfection. If you were flying over in a plane, you'd see nothing but trees. Only down here, in the mud and the gloom, can you see the artifice. You are standing at the threshold of the forgotten archives, and the door is shut tight. But you didn't come all this way to stare at the siding. You came to see what's inside. You turn to the guide, who is sharpening his machete with a small stone. He points to a dark, triangular fissure near the base of the structure, hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss. It looks like the mouth of a cave, but the edges are defined by two massive, twisted root systems that have grown together to form an archway. It's inviting, in a terrifying, don't go in there sort of way. You check your flashlight, the batteries are good, you adjust your pack, you take one last look at the sky, the blue patches visible through the trees, knowing it might be the last time you see natural light for a while. The air coming out of that fissure is cooler, carrying a scent of wet earth and something else, something spicy, like old resin. You step forward, your boots squelching in the mud, crossing the line between the natural forest and the engineered one. The jungle noise seems to drop away instantly, replaced by the sound of your own breathing and the drip, drip, drip of water falling from the living ceiling above. You have found the green horizon. Now you just have to hope the architects left a way out. You pause right at the threshold of that dark, breathing archway. Before you plunge into the unknown, you need to understand exactly what you're looking at, because your brain is currently trying to interpret this structure as a building, but it's failing. We are conditioned to see architecture as a process of subtraction and assembly. You cut stone from a quarry. You chop down a tree and mill it into planks. You mix sand and cement. It's all about taking dead materials and forcing them into a shape that resists gravity. But the surface you are running your hand over right now, which feels weirdly warm, by the way, is the result of a completely inverted philosophy. This is architecture by addition. This is architecture by persuasion. You lean in close to the masonry. It isn't a solid block. It's a chaotic, frozen explosion of ligneous matter. What looks like a column is actually a bundle of 50 separate saplings that were twisted together when they were young, braided like hair, and then allowed to grow until they fused into a single, impenetrable pillar. In botany, this process is called inosculation, when two individual trees rub against each other until the bark wears away and they physically merge their vascular systems. It's a natural phenomenon, usually an accident. But here, looking at the repetitive, diamond-shaped lattice pattern of the wall, you realize this wasn't an accident. It was an assembly line. Think about the sheer audacity of this. If you want to build a stone pyramid, you need thousands of slaves, massive ramps, and decades of back-breaking labor to drag rocks across the desert. But if you want to build a living pyramid, you don't need muscle. You need patience. You plant a seed, you wait, you guide a tendril, you wait some more. You are trading kinetic energy for time. It's the ultimate work smarter, not harder move, provided you have a few centuries to wait for your living room to finish growing. Historians still argue whether this shift to bioarchitecture was a choice born of spiritual reverence for the forest or a pragmatic response to a lack of easily quarryable stone in this specific region of the jungle. Some scholars suggest it was pure camouflage, a way to hide an empire in plain sight, while others think it was just a flex, a way of saying, we don't just conquer the land, we command the biology. You step back to admire the structural logic. The outer shell of this pyramid seems to be primarily composed of the ficus thonigi, or the strangler fig. Now, in the wild, the strangler fig is a botanical jerk. It starts life as a seed dropped by a bird in the canopy of a host tree, then sends roots down to the ground, gradually wrapping around the host, stealing its sunlight and nutrients until the host dies and rots away, leaving a hollow lattice of fig roots standing in its place. It's nature's coffin. But the engineers here weaponized that aggression. They didn't let the figs strangle random trees. They built scaffolds, perhaps bamboo or light timber frames, in the shape of the rooms and corridors they wanted, and then unleashed the figs. The roots grew down the scaffolds, thickening, fusing, and hardening. Once the structure was self-supporting, the temporary scaffold could be removed or just left to rot, consumed by the fig. You were looking at a building that was essentially 3D printed by nature, layer by layer, year by year. There's a quirky little tidbit from local folklore that might explain the texture you were seeing near the base. Legends speak of the honey masons, workers who would coat specific parts of the young trees in a sticky, sweet resin mixed with irritants. This would attract specific species of burrowing beetles or ants to gnaw at the bark in precise patterns, stimulating the tree to produce scar tissue. That scar tissue, tougher and denser than regular wood, is what forms the load-bearing ridges of the archway you're standing under. It's literally architecture. If you think getting a contractor to fix your drywall is a hassle, imagine trying to coordinate a construction crew of termites and angry beetles. You press your shoulder against the archway to test its stability. It doesn't budge. It feels as solid as granite. The density of tropical hardwoods is no joke. Some species, like Lignum vitae or African blackwood, are so dense they don't even float in water. When you weave them together and let them fuse for 1,000 years, you aren't dealing with wood anymore. You're dealing with organic composite armor. This brings us to the concrete paradox. Modern concrete has a lifespan of maybe 50 to 100 years before it starts to crack and crumble as the rebar rusts. We build for the short term, but a living tree, a ceiba or a baobab, can live for over 1,000 years. And unlike a stone wall, which only gets weaker with time as erosion sets in, a living wall gets stronger. It adds more layers, it heals its own cracks. If a storm blows a branch off, the building just grows a new one. You are standing in front of a structure that has technically been under construction for a millennium and is still, in a way, not finished. The implications are staggering. If this civilization figured out how to grow their cities, they didn't need supply chains. They didn't need to destroy the environment to house themselves. Their housing was the environment. It's the ultimate sustainable dream, minus the part where you have to share your bedroom with whatever spiders decide to move into the wall cavities. You shine your flashlight deeper into the gloom of the archway. The transition from the wild jungle to the engineered jungle is subtle. The chaos of the forest floor gives way to a floor that is still wood, but smooth polished by centuries of feet, or perhaps by the flow of water. You can see that the roots here were trained to grow horizontally, woven into a tight mat to form a floor that hovers a few feet above the muddy earth, keeping the inhabitants dry. It creates a strange cognitive dissonance. Your eyes see tree, but your brain recognizes hallway. It's like stepping into the ribcage of a beast that decided to become a cathedral. You take a deep breath, smelling that spicy resin scent again. It's stronger here. You realize it might be a natural insect repellent produced by the trees themselves, bred into them by the architects to keep the interior free of pests. You look at your guide. He's waiting, looking unbothered, probably thinking about what he's going to have for dinner, while you have an existential crisis about the nature of construction. He gestures again. In. You adjust your grip on your flashlight. You've analyzed the bricks. You've admired the mortar of fused bark. And you've wrapped your head around the idea that this building is technically a living organism. But understanding the walls is one thing. Understanding the people who lived inside them is another. You take the first step onto the woven root floor. It offers slightly under your weight a gentle springiness that feels more welcoming than cold stone. You are entering the belly of the green horizon. As you move further into the interior, the light from the entrance rapidly fades, filtered through layers of leaves and wood until it becomes a dusky greenish twilight. You are walking down what can only be described as a hallway, but it feels more like the throat of a leviathan. The woven root floor beneath your boots is surprisingly level, offering that same firm, organic springiness. But what grabs your attention? What forces you to stop and crane your neck back until your spine puctures the pillars? In a traditional cathedral, you'd be looking at columns of marble or limestone, fluted and polished. Here, you are staring at the raw, terrifying power of the Ceiba pentandra, the silkatan tree. In West Africa, the Ceiba is royalty. It is the tallest tree in the region, capable of growing over 200 feet high, with a trunk diameter that can rival a small house. But the ones standing before you have been altered. They haven't been allowed to grow wild and chaotic. They have been disciplined. You approach the nearest column. It's about 10 feet wide. At first, it looks like a single massive trunk, but as your eyes adjust to the gloom, you see the seams. This isn't one tree. It is a cluster of 6 or 7 saplings that were planted in a tight circle centuries ago. As they grew, the silk cotton architects, the mysterious guild behind this madness, systematically stripped the bark from the facing sides and bound them together with high-tension vines. Over decades, the trees healed into one another, fusing into a single fluted pillar of immense structural density. It's like a bundle of muscle fibers frozen in wood. Historians still argue whether this guild, often referred to in oral traditions as the shapers of the green, were viewed as engineers, priests, or perhaps something darker, like sorcerers. In many Ghanaian traditions, the Ceiba tree is believed to be the abode of spirits and ancestors. To manipulate one, to bend it to human will, would have been seen as a supreme act of spiritual dominance or blasphemy. These architects weren't just building a roof, they were wrestling with gods. You run your hand along the grain of the column. You can feel ridges and knots that look suspiciously deliberate. This brings us to the tools of the trade. You won't find chisels or saws here. The tool of the silk cotton architect was the clamp and the wedge. They likely used wedges made of stone or harder heartwood to force the young trees to flare out at specific angles, creating the massive buttress roots that support the ceiling above. Imagine wearing braces on your teeth, but instead of fixing an overbite, the braces are designed to turn you into a load-bearing wall. That is essentially what these trees endured for the first 50 years of their lives. It's a level of forward thinking that is almost nauseating to the modern mind. We get impatient if a web page takes more than 3 seconds to load. These people initiated construction projects that their grandchildren wouldn't see finished. It implies a societal stability that makes the Roman Empire look like a weekend pop-up shop. There is a fascinating fringe theory regarding how they managed to get the trees to grow so quickly and so thickly. We know that plants respond to environmental stress. Wind makes a tree grow stronger roots. For example, some archaeobotanists speculate that the architects employed stress teams, groups of workers whose sole job was to physically harass the saplings, pulling on them, shaking them, perhaps even inflicting minor damage to trigger a hyper-aggressive healing response. Essentially, they bullied the forest into becoming a fortress. As you walk past the column, you notice small rhythmic indentations spiraling up the trunk. They look like footholds, and that's exactly what they are. The architects didn't use ladders. They grew the ladders into the structure. You imagine a worker, hundreds of years ago, climbing this living scaffolding to prune the canopy, armed with nothing but a knife and a lack of fear of heights. The atmosphere in here is strange. It's quiet, but not dead quiet. It's the quiet of a library, heavily insulated. The massive thermal mass of the living wood dampens all sound. You clap your hands, and the sound dies instantly, swallowed by the walls. No echo, it's eerie. You probably wouldn't want to play hide and seek in here. You'd never be found, and honestly, considering we are inside a giant plant, you might just get digested. You continue deeper, tracing the lines of the ceiling. The roof beams are actually horizontal branches that were grafted together across the hallway. This technique, known as pleaching, is still used in ornamental gardening today to create nice little archways for weddings. But here, the scale is industrial. These branches are thick as telephone poles. They are supporting tons of biomass above them. And here is a mainstream historical fact that grounds this fantasy. The Ashanti people and other Akan groups were master woodcarvers. The stool is a sacred symbol of power in Ghana, the golden stool being the soul of the Ashanti nation. Their understanding of wood grain, density, and durability was absolute. It is not a stretch to imagine that a specific subsect of these artisans decided to stop carving dead wood and start carving living wood. The sheer weight of the canopy above must be immense, yet the Siba pillars handle it effortlessly. The buttress roots those fin-like protrusions at the base act, exactly like the flying buttresses of Notre Dame, transferring the downward thrust of the weight outward into the ground. But unlike Notre Dame, if the ground shifts here, the roots just grow deeper to compensate. It's an earthquake roof system that updates its own firmware. You spot something embedded in the wood of a pillar at eye level. You shine your light on it. It's a stone, a smooth, reverpalish stone, completely engulfed by the bark, like a pearl in an oyster. It looks like it was placed in the crook of a branch centuries ago, and the tree simply grew around it. Was it a decorative element? A structural shim? Or perhaps a signature of the specific architect who worked on this section? It's a human touch in a wall of biology, a reminder that hands touched this, that minds planned this. You take a moment to drink some water. The air is breathable, rich in oxygen obviously, but the humidity is still high. You feel like you're walking through a very clean, very sturdy greenhouse. The arbor masons didn't just build a shell, they built an ecosystem. As you wipe your forehead, you realize that the safety of this central hall is deceptive. You are in the core, the supported center, but a fortress is only as good as its perimeter. And the perimeter of this place wasn't designed to be welcoming. You look ahead to where the hallway widens. The smooth woven floor starts to look a bit more rugged. The architecture changes from the elegant, soaring curves of the Siba to something sharper, darker, and infinitely more hostile. The architects knew that they had something worth protecting, and they didn't rely on the goodwill of their neighbors to keep it safe. They built a wall, but they didn't use bricks. They used thorns. You adjust your pack, checking to make sure your clothes are snag-free, because where you're going next, loose fabric is a liability. You're heading toward the outer defensive ring, the living fortifications, and if the legends are true, the plants there have a taste for blood. Let's hope the architects left the safety off. You leave the soaring, cathedral-like calm of the Siba Hall and push toward the outer rim of the structure. The air changes immediately. It loses that sweet, resinous scent and takes on a sharper, more metallic tantha smell of crushed leaves and something acidic. You are approaching the green wall, but don't let the name fool you. This isn't a hedge maze, this is a weapon. You step through a narrower archway and find yourself looking at the back side of the exterior defensive layer. From the outside, remember, this looked like a chaotic jungle slope. From the inside, you can see the sadistic brilliance of the design. The architects didn't just plant trees here, they planted a nightmare. You are looking at a dense, impenetrable thicket of Acacia ataxacantha, flame thorn and Caesalpinia decapitella, commonly known as wait-a-bit bush, because if you get snagged in it, you're going to be waiting a bit while you untangle yourself, or in this case, waiting until you bleed out. The vines here are thick as your arm and woven into a mesh so tight a rat couldn't T-squeeze through. But the real deterrent is the hardware. You shine your light on a vine hanging near your face. It is studded with recurved thorns, each one about 2 inches long and hooked like a shark's tooth. These aren't just designed to prick you, they are designed to grab, tear, and hold. Historians still argue whether these defensive belts were passive barriers or actively maintained kill zones. Some evidence suggests that during times of siege, the defenders would prune the inner layers to create tunnels, allowing them to move safely while the attackers were forced to hack their way through. The outer thorniest layers essentially funneling the enemy into pre-designed traps. It's a terrifying thought, a wall that you can't climb, can't batter down, and that actively flays you alive if you try to push through it. You carefully extend a trekking pole to touch a cluster of leaves. As you disturb the branch, you see movement. Dozens of large red ants swarm out of hollow bulbous growths at the base of the thorns. This is the chromatogaster ant, a species that has a symbiotic relationship with the acacia. The tree provides housing the hollow thorns and food nectar, and in exchange, the ants provide a standing army. If you brush against this wall, you don't just get cut, you get swarmed by thousands of stinging insects that attack anything disturbing their host. This is biowarfare, ancient style. The architects didn't just build a wall, they garrisoned it with millions of tiny, angry soldiers that don't need a paycheck, just sugar. You probably wouldn't want to lean against this wall to take a selfie. There's a fringe theory that suggests the architects engaged in selective breeding to enhance the toxicity of these plants. Local legends speak of the burning bush barriers that cause blindness or paralysis if the sap touched the skin. While we haven't found chemical analysis to prove they were genetically modifying the plants, obviously, the knowledge of toxic botany in West Africa is profound. Using plants like euphorbia, which bleeds a blindingly caustic latex, as part of a defensive wall is entirely within the realm of possibility. You walk along the perimeter of this thorny curtain. The density is claustrophobic. You can see how this would stop an army. A traditional siege engine like a battering ram is useless here. You can't shatter a vine. It just bends and springs back. Fire? Maybe, but green living wood full of sap is notoriously hard to burn, especially in a humid rainforest. You'd need an immense amount of accelerant to get this wall to catch. And by the time you did, the defenders would have likely rained arrows down on you from the canopy above. You spot a section where the weave pattern changes. It looks like a funnel. The thorns here are angled inwards, allowing easy entry, but making exit impossible, like a lobster trap for humans. This was likely a sally port or a trap for overeager invaders. You can imagine the panic of soldiers rushing into this gap, thinking they've found a breach, only to realize the walls are closing in and the ants are waking up. It's a stark reminder that this civilization, despite its harmonious relationship with nature, was not a pacifist utopia. They were protecting something. You don't build a wall of razor wire plants unless you have enemies who want what you have. The green horizon wasn't just a home, it was a vault. As you navigate this perimeter, you notice the ground is much damper than the interior hall. You look down. There are shallow channels cut into the root floor, slick with moss. Water is trickling through them, moving from the outer wall toward the center of the pyramid. It's odd. Usually, you want to drain water away from your foundation, not toward it. You follow one of the channels, it leads away from the defensive wall and disappears under a massive, hulking root structure that looks like a knotted wooden pipe. You place your hand on it. It's cold, very cold, and it's vibrating. There is high-pressure water moving through there. You realize that the defensive wall does double duty. The massive surface area of the leaves on the outside captures the torrential tropical rains, funneling the water down through the stems and into these collection channels. But the pressure, that's not just gravity. You are stepping away from the battle of the thorns and moving toward the plumbing of the gods. You signal your guide, who is standing a safe distance from the ant-infested acacia, looking bored but watchful. You point toward the thick root pipe. He nods. We are about to see how a civilization without metal pipes or electric pumps managed to move water through a building the size of a mountain. And honestly, if you thought the killer plants were impressive, wait until you see the plumbing. It involves a lot less copper and a lot more capillary action on steroids. You step away from the jagged, hostile perimeter and back toward the dark, humid heart of the structure, following the sound of rushing water. You follow the slick, moss-lined channel away from the hostile thorns and deeper into the gloom. The sound of the jungle, the chirps, the buzzes, the distant cries of monkeys begins to fade, replaced by a new sound. It's a low, resonant thrumming. It sounds less like a machine and more like the purring of a very large, very sleepy cat. But as you turn a corner, ducking under a massive archway of fused roots, you realize that sound is actually the vibration of water moving at incredible velocity. You are standing in the hydraulic heart of the green horizon. In front of you lies what looks like a giant wooden serpent. It's a tube, easily 5 feet in diameter, emerging from the earth and disappearing into the ceiling. This isn't a carved log, it's a taproot, a single continuous biological cylinder. Specifically, it appears to be the taproot of the Militia excelsa, or the Iroko tree. In West African folklore, the Iroko is a spirit tree, feared and respected, often associated with sacrifices. But here, it has been enslaved for plumbing. You reach out and touch the pipe. It's freezing, condensation beads on the dark, rough bark dripping onto your boots. The wood is vibrating violently under your hand. Inside this casing, thousands of gallons of water are rushing upward against gravity. Now, mainstream history tells us that the Romans were the masters of aqueducts, using gravity and stone arches to move water over vast distances. But the Romans were working with dead materials. They had to build downhill. The engineers here, however, hacked the fundamental physics of botany. They utilized the natural process of transpiration, pull the mechanism by which trees suck water from the ground to their leaves. A mature rainforest tree can lift hundreds of gallons of water a day, purely through the pressure differential created by water evaporating from its leaves. The architects seemingly took this passive system and turbocharged it. Historians still argue whether they amplified this pressure using a series of check valves grown directly into the root, essentially flaps of living tissue that prevent backflow if they utilized a lost form of wooden hydraulic ram pump at the water table level. The latter would imply a grasp of fluid dynamics that rivals the Industrial Revolution. Standing here feeling the sheer power thrumming through the wood, you're inclined to believe they've figured out something we haven't, but the real genius is in the manufacturing. How do you get a 50-foot taproot to be hollow? You can't exactly drill it out with a hand auger without killing the tree. This is where the rotsmiths came in. According to some interpretations of the glyphs found in the region, there was a specialized guild that used controlled fungal inoculation. They would drill a small pilot hole into the center of the living root and introduce a specific strain of heartwood fungus. This fungus was aggressive, but selective. It would devour the dead heartwood in the center of the tree, but leave the living sapwood on the exterior untouched. Once the core was turned to mush, they would flush it out with water, leaving a perfectly smooth, living wooden pipe. The tree, trying to heal the internal wound, would deposit hard resins on the inner wall, essentially lining the pipe with a natural waterproof varnish. It's brilliant. A metal pipe rusts. A stone pipe cracks. A living pipe, it maintains itself. If a leak springs, the tree senses the damage and grows scar tissue over the hole. It's a self-healing aqueduct. You kneel down to inspect a junction point. Here, a smaller root splices into the main line. The joinery is seamless literally. The two roots have inosculated their tissues, fusing completely. There are no bolts, no gaskets, no leaking flanges, just biology doing its job. But there is a quirky, slightly unsettling detail about this system. You notice a small, translucent hatch made of polished resin like a viewing port, bedded in the side of the main root. It looks like amber. You shine your flashlight through it into the rushing water. Something moves inside. It's not just water. There are things swimming in there. Small, pale crustaceans, scuttling against the current. These are likely a species of freshwater river crab, or perhaps a specialized type of shrimp. In a metal system, you'd filter these out. Here, they are the maintenance crew. They scrub the algae from the inner walls, eat any detritus that gets sucked in, and keep the flow clean. It's a biosymbiotic cleaning service. You probably wouldn't want to drink a glass of this water without checking for shrimp first, but in terms of engineering, it's genius. The vibration in the floor increases. You look up. The main root pipe branches out overhead, feeding into a complex manifold of smaller roots that disappear into the walls. This system isn't just for drinking water, it's for cooling, it's for irrigation, it's for fire suppression. You are looking at the arteries of the pyramid, and like any circulatory system, it has a pulse. If you stay quiet and listen closely, beneath the constant rush, there is a rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump. It's slow, maybe once every 10 seconds. Some crypto-historians suggest this is evidence of a heart-to-massive, central pumping mechanism located deep underground, perhaps powered by a subterranean river or even manual labor. Others think it's a natural hydraulic shockwave, a water hammer effect that the architects learned to control and use as a timing mechanism for the city. Like a ticking clock heard through the floorboards. You stand up, wiping the condensation from your hands. It's humbling. We pride ourselves on our stainless steel and our PVC, but this system has survived for centuries without a single trip to the hardware store. It makes you wonder what our cities would look like if we had chosen to partner with nature instead of paving over it. But the water has to go somewhere, and judging by the angle of the main pipe, it's heading straight up toward the entrance you haven't seen yet, the main gate. Not the service entrance you crawled through, but the ceremonial front door. And if the plumbing is this sophisticated, you can bet the front door isn't just a hinge and a knob. The guide waves you over to a narrow staircase carved directly into a cinder root. It spirals upward, following the ascent of the water main. The air gets a little lighter here, a little less dank. You can see a faint glow from above, not sunlight, but something softer. You start to climb. The wooden steps are worn smooth in the center, cupped by the passage of thousands of feet. You are walking in the footsteps of the engineers who monitored this pulse, the people who kept the blood of the city flowing. As you ascend, the sound of the water changes pitch, becoming higher, tighter. The pressure is building. You are nearing the release point. You emerge from the stairwell into a transitional space. The heavy industrial feel of the hydraulic chamber falls away. The walls here are lighter, the wood is paler, perhaps bleached by exposure to light. You are approaching the photosynthesis gates. You pause to catch your breath. You've seen the defense, and you've seen the guts. Now you're about to see the face of the civilization. And if the legends are true, this door doesn't open with a key. It opens with the sun. And considering it's currently dark outside in the real world, you might have to get creative to get through. You emerge from the spiral staircase into a space that feels less like a hallway and more like an atrium. The crushing claustrophobia of the root tunnels vanishes, replaced by a soaring verticality. Above you, the canopy has been manipulated to form a natural skylight, though right now, it's just a patch of velvet darkness studded with stars. But it's not the ceiling that stops you in your tracks, it's the wall in front of you. This is the main entrance to the pyramid, viewed from the inside, and it is shut tight. You are looking at the photosynthesis gates, but forget everything you know about gates. There are no hinges, no iron bars, no heavy oak beams. The aperture, a massive parabolic archway about 30 feet high, is sealed by what looks like a colossal living puzzle. It is composed of hundreds of gigantic, fleshy leaves, each the size of a surfboard, interlocking with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. They are overlapped like the feathers on a bird's wing, creating a hermetic seal that is airtight and, more importantly, predator-tight. This is the ultimate security system, a door that is powered by the sun. In botany, this phenomenon is called nyctinicity, the rhythmic sleep movements of plants. Think of the prayer plant on your windowsill that folds its leaves up at night, or the morning glory that curls shut when the sun goes down. The architects took this gentle biological quirk and scaled it up to industrial proportions. During the day, when the sun hits the outer face of the pyramid, turgor pressure increases in the base of these massive leaves, causing them to unfurl and lay flat, opening the archway to let air and people flow in. At night, as the light fades, the pressure drops and the leaves snap shut, locking the city down. It is a passive solarpred lock that never needs a battery change. But there's a problem. It's night. The gate is currently in Fort Knox mode, and you need to see if you can trick it. You walk up to the wall of leaves. They are thick, waxy, and cool. You push against one. It's like pushing against a car tire. It has a rubbery give, but it's incredibly strong. You're not kicking this door down. Historians still argue whether the specific species used here was a genetically isolated variant of the Calathea family, known for its dramatic leaf movements, or a now extinct relative of the giant water lily. Some fringe theorists go further, suggesting the plants were bred to recognize specific spectral signatures, meaning they wouldn't just open for any light, but only for the specific wavelength of high noon sun, effectively creating a time lock that only opened between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. You look at your guide. He sighs, reaches into his pack, and pulls out a flare. He looks at you, eyebrows raised. It's crude, it's destructive, and it's exactly the kind of thing an impatient explorer would do. But you shake your head. You didn't come here to burn the place down. You reach for your high-lumen tactical flashlight instead. You crank the beam to its maximum setting, blinding 2,000 lumens of cool white LED light. You aim it directly at the pulvinous, the swollen joint at the base of the central leaf cluster, essentially the hinge of the door. Nothing happens. You hold it there. Your arm starts to get tired. You feel a bit ridiculous, pointing a flashlight at a plant, expecting it to yield. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, then a creak. It's a wet, fibrous sound, like celery snapping. The leaf directly in the beam shudders. The artificial intensity of the LED is tricking the photoreceptors in the plant cells. It thinks the sun just came out, very locally and very suddenly. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive leaf begins to peel back. It pulls away from its neighbors, with a sticky sucking sound, breaking the vacuum seal. A gap appears. Cool, fresh night air from the jungle outside rushes in to mix with the humid air of the atrium. You've just hacked a 1000-air-lad biological computer with a battery-operated torch. As the leaf curls back, it reveals the thickness of the dorizally 2 feet of solid water-filled vegetation. It's not just a curtain, it's a blast shield. You realize that during the day, when these leaves are open, they likely angle themselves to act as solar collectors, shading the interior while harvesting energy. It's a door that doubles as a power plant. There is a quirky detail etched into the wood frame surrounding the gate. You shine your light on the perimeter. There are polished bronze mirrors embedded in the frame, angled precisely to catch the first rays of dawn and direct them onto the trigger joints of the leaves. This system ensured that the gates would open at the first crack of light, acting as an automatic alarm clock for the entire city. Wake up! The door is open, but looking closely at the mirrors, you see scratches, deep, frantic gouges. This brings us to a chilling realization. If the gates close automatically at night, and they are this strong, what happened if you were stuck outside when the sun went down? The scratches suggest that people lore things tried desperately to get back in as the light faded, clawing at the indifferent mirrors in a last-ditch attempt to reflect a sliver of twilight onto the mechanism. It's a grim reminder that in a city run by biology, nature doesn't make exceptions. If you miss the curfew, you are left to the mercy of the jungle. You step through the gap you've created. Careful not to let the leaf snap back on you. It looks heavy enough to break a rib. You are now standing on the threshold between the inner sanctum and the outer world. But you aren't leaving. You just wanted to prove it could be done. You step back inside, turning off your flashlight. Almost instantly, the leaf senses the drop in light energy. It begins to curl forward again, sluggishly at first, then with a final firm thud, it slots back into place, sealing the gap. The darkness returns. You have breached the photosynthesis gate. You've confirmed the mechanism. But the atrium is just the foyer. The real secrets of the green horizon aren't at the front door. They are buried deep in the vascular system of the pyramid. You turn back toward the interior. The path ahead leads downward, past the hydraulic pumps, into the root mass itself. You are going into the xylem. The air getting sucked down into that dark tunnel is rich with the smell of earth and water. It's time to see what lies beneath the floorboards. You turn your back on the tantalizing glimpse of the night sky and the fresh air of the atrium. You are committing now. You are heading down the path ahead. Doesn't look like a hallway anymore. It looks like an esophagus. You are entering the xylem, the vascular underworld of the green horizon. And honestly, it feels a little bit like you're voluntarily walking into the digestive tract of a monster. The floor here slopes sharply downward. The woven root mats of the upper levels are gone, replaced by a slick, ribbed surface that feels unnervingly like cartilage under your boots. You put a hand out to steady yourself on the wall. It's wet, not just damp wet, a thin film of viscous fluid coats. Everything here, it's sap. You wipe your hand on your pants, but it's that sticky kind of residue that's going to be with you for the rest of your life, like a bad tattoo or a student loan. You are now deep inside the trunk structure, moving toward the root ball. In a normal tree, the xylem is the tissue responsible for transporting water and dissolved minerals from the roots up to the leaves. It is a one-way street, up. But the silk cotton architects, in their infinite madness, seem to have repurposed these massive, hollowed-out channels as a transit system for the dark, subterranean levels of the city. The air here is thick enough to chew. It smells of fermentation and raw biology. It's warm, too, a stark contrast to the cool night air you just left. You are surrounded by millions of tons of metabolizing biomass. The tree is generating heat. You loosen your collar. It feels like you're hiking inside a compost heap. As you descend, the tunnel narrows. You have to hunch over slightly. This is not a place built for comfort. It's a place built for function. It's a service corridor. Here is a mainstream historical fact to ground you. In southern Africa, the baobab tree Adansonia digitata naturally becomes hollow as it ages. Indigenous people have used these massive hollows for centuries as houses, barns, cisterns, and even prisons. There is a famous baobab in South Africa that was converted into a pub, complete with a dartboard. So, the idea of walking around inside a living tree isn't fantasy. It's just a very organic form of real estate. But while the baobab hollows out due to decay, these tunnels feel manicured. The walls are smooth, almost polished. You shine your light ahead. The tunnel branches off into smaller, darker arteries. Some of them are completely flooded, the dark water still and silent. Others are choked with hanging curtains of pale white roots that brush against your face like wet cobwebs. You push them aside, trying not to think about what might be nesting in them. Spiders here probably don't build webs. They probably just build condos. There is a quirky, unsettling detail about these lower tunnels. You notice that at regular intervals, there are handholds carved into the wood, but they are ... wrong. They are too far apart for a human. They are spaced for something with a much longer reach, or perhaps for someone who is moving very, very fast. This brings up a fringe theory that is popular among the more imaginative cryptohistorians. They call it the arboreal gigantism hypothesis. The idea is that living in a hyoxagon, nutrient-rich environment inside these massive biostructures for generations might have physically altered the inhabitants. Some legends speak of the long-armed guardians who could swing through the xylem shafts like gibbons, never touching the floor. Looking at those distant handholds, you have to wonder if the people who built this were built differently than us. Or maybe they just had really long ladders and took them with them when they left. You reach a landing, a wider cavity, where several tunnels converge. In the center is a circular pit, leading straight down into the blackness. You kick a small piece of bark into it. You wait 1 second, 2 seconds. Splash, deep water. This is the water table connection. This is where the tree drinks. Historians still argue whether these deep xylem chambers were used solely for maintenance keeping, the roots clear of rot and pests, or if they served a ritualistic purpose. Some suggest that the descent into the root was a rite of passage for young engineers, a way to connect spiritually with the source of the city's life. Others, more pragmatically, argue that this was the sewage system, and you are currently standing in the ancient equivalent of a septic tank. Let's hope it's the spiritual thing. The sound in here is oppressive. It's a low-frequency thrum, a vibration that you feel in your teeth. It's the sound of the tree drinking. Imagine the noise of a milkshake being sucked up a straw, but magnified by a factor of 1,000,000. That is the acoustic reality of the xylem. You continue down a side tunnel that seems drier. The walls here are different. They are lined with something that glitters in your flashlight beam. You lean in close. It's crystallized salt. The tree, in its process of pulling water from the ground, also pulls up minerals. To prevent these minerals from reaching toxic levels in the leaves, the tree or the engineers manipulating it sequestered the excess salt here in the lower trunk. These walls are a mineral deposit. You realize that this civilization didn't just grow their homes, they grew their seasoning. You could literally lick the wall to salt your dinner. Please don't lick the wall. We talked about this. Suddenly, your light catches movement. You freeze. A shadow flits across the junction ahead. It's too big to be a rat. It moves with a jerky, skittering motion. You hold your breath. You are miles from civilization, deep underground, inside a plant. If there is something living down here, it has likely never seen a human before, and it might be hungry. You creep forward, peering around the corner. It's a bat, a massive, fruity-eating bat hanging upside down from a root protrusion, staring at you with large, confused eyes. It lets out a high-pitched squeak and drops, fluttering past your head and vanishing up the tunnel toward the air vents. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Just a bat. The green horizon is still an ecosystem, after all. Animals are the tenants that don't pay rent. But the presence of the bat means something important. There is airflow. Bats don't like stagnant air. There is a draft moving through this tunnel, a consistent, cool breeze that is cutting through the humidity. You turn your face into the wind. It's surprisingly chilly. You are feeling the intake breath of the pyramid. You have navigated the wet, sticky transport tunnels of the xylem. But now you are finding the lungs. You follow the breeze. It leads you away from the dark, flooded pits and toward a section of the structure where the architecture seems to open up. The oppressive, crushing weight of the wood feels lighter here. You can hear a whistling sound, the sound of wind moving over varied apertures. You are about to exit the vascular system and enter the climate control center. And thank goodness, because you are sweating through your shirt. And the air conditioning is apparently stuck on Amazon rainforest down here. You pick up the pace, chasing that cool draft like a desert wanderer chasing a mirage.
You follow the groaning sound away from the cool sanctuary of the airshaft, moving laterally through a corridor that feels increasingly cramped. The ceiling drops lower, forcing you to hunch your shoulders. The walls here aren't the smooth, polite paneling of the residential zones. They are bulging, twisted, and scarred. You are entering the muscle tissue of the pyramid, the place where the physics of this impossible structure are laid bare. You step into a cavernous, low-ceilinged chamber that the outline calls the Weaver's Hole, but honestly, it looks more like a wrestling match that got frozen in time. This room is a chaotic explosion of tension. Everywhere you look, massive limbs of wood are locked in a silent, screaming struggle. You see beams the size of telephone poles that have been bent into U-shapes, their fibers stretched to the breaking point, held in place by other beams wrapped around them like boa constrictors. This isn't carpentry. Carpentry is geometry. It's straight lines and right angles. This is bondage. You approach a massive junction in the center of the room. It looks like a giant wooden fist. 5 separate trunks converge here, woven into a not-so-complex it makes a sailor's carrot bend look like a shoelace. But here's the kicker. They aren't just tied, they are fused. You run your hand over the knot. It's slick and hard as stone. You can't find the beginning or the end of any single strand. The bark has flowed together, creating a single, massive callus. This is the structural secret of the green horizon. In a stone arch, gravity pushes everything down, compressing the stones together. It's a compression structure, but trees are designed to sway in the wind. They are tension structures. The architects didn't build a pile of wood. They built a suspension bridge that goes in a circle. Here is a mainstream historical fact to help you visualize this. In the state of Meghalaya, India, the Khasi people have been building living root bridges for centuries. They guide the aerial roots of the rubber fig tree across rivers using hollowed-out betel nut trunks. Over decades, the roots reach the other side, take root in the soil, and thicken. The bridges get stronger with age, not weaker. Some can hold 50 people at once. The structure you are standing in right now is that exact same technology, but instead of bridging a river, it's bridging the sky. But the scale here implies a level of mathematical understanding that is, frankly, terrifying. To weave a knot this size, you have to know exactly how much the tree will grow in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. If you tie it too tight, you strangle the sap flow and the limb dies and the roof collapses. If you tie it too loose, the knot slips and the roof collapses. This brings us to the weavers. Local oral traditions whisper of a specific caste known as the bone breakers. The name sounds violent, but it referred to the bones of the trees, not people. These workers were responsible for the initial bending of the saplings. Legends say they used massive winches made of braided leather and counterweights of stone to force the young ironwood trees into these unnatural curves. They would hold them there for years, constantly adjusting the tension, massaging the bark to encourage the welding process. Imagine a construction site where the steel girders are fighting back. That was their Tuesday. You look up at the ceiling. It's a lattice of tension. It looks like the underside of a woven basket, but one capable of supporting millions of pounds of biomass above it. You realize that if you were to cut a single one of these major tendons, the whole room might not collapse. But it would twang. The shockwave would ripple through the entire pyramid. Historians still argue whether the weavers used a form of biological maquette, growing miniature versions of the structure using fast-growing vines to test the stress points before committing to the century-long project of the main build. It's the organic equivalent of a wind tunnel test. If the vine model collapsed, they knew not to plant the real trees in that configuration. There is a quirky, slightly disturbing detail about the knot you're standing next to. Embedded deep in the center of the fusion, barely visible under the layers of overgrown bark, is a piece of metal. You shine your light on it. It's the tip of a spear, or maybe a large chisel. It's rusted, almost completely swallowed by the wood. Was it a tool left behind by a careless worker, or was it a reinforcement? Some theories suggest that for the higher stress joints, the architects would insert iron rods into the core of the young bundle. As the trees grew, they would envelop the iron, creating a reinforced concrete effect. But with wood and iron, reinforced timber, it would explain how they achieved spans that should be impossible for wood alone. The creaking sound you heard earlier returns creak. It's louder here. You can see the knot in front of you actually shift a microscopic movement, maybe a millimeter. The building is adjusting its posture. It's unnerving. In a skyscraper, if the support beams move, you run. Here, it's just the house getting comfortable. You walk around the perimeter of the weaver's hall. The floor here is uneven, rising and falling over the massive root knees that anchor the tension cables. You have to watch your step. It's dark in here, darker than the rest of the structure so far. The light from the entrance is long gone, and the air shafts don't reach this deep into the core. You check your flashlight. The battery indicator is blinking. You have spares, of course, but the darkness here feels heavy. It's a physical weight. You are deep inside a solid object. If your light goes out, you are effectively blind in a cave made of wood. That thought brings you to a practical question. How did they see? The architects and the weavers spent their lives in these deep, sunless chambers. You can't burn torches in here. Fire is the one thing this city fears more than anything. The smoke would choke the ventilation system, and the risk of igniting the dry inner bark is too high. You don't light a campfire inside a tree. So, did they work in the dark? Did they use mirrors to reflect sunlight down miles of tunnels? No, that's too complex for these twisting corridors. You spot something on the wall. It's a patch of moss. But it's not green, it's a pale, ghostly white, and as you accidentally sweep your flashlight beam away from it, for a split second, you swear it glowed. You turn your light off. Total, suffocating blackness. You count to 3, letting your eyes adjust, and then the room begins to wake up. Faintly at first, then stronger, a network of soft, blue-green veins begins to appear on the walls. It's not moss, it's fungus. The weaver's hall isn't pitch black. It's bathed in the eerie underwater glow of bioluminescence. You are looking at the ancient world's solution to the light bulb. You turn your flashlight back on because, let's be real, the ghost light is cool but creepy, and the glow vanishes, drowned out by the LED. You are about to leave the structural gymnastics of the Weaver's Hall and venture into the navigation system of the dark tunnels. You are heading toward bioluminescent navigation, and you're going to find out that the architects didn't just farm trees, they farmed light.
You follow the groaning sound away from the cool sanctuary of the airshaft, moving laterally through a corridor that feels increasingly cramped. The ceiling drops lower, forcing you to hunch your shoulders. The walls here aren't the smooth, polite paneling of the residential zones. They are bulging, twisted, and scarred. You are entering the muscle tissue of the pyramid, the place where the physics of this impossible structure are laid bare. You step into a cavernous, low-ceiling chamber that the outline calls the Weaver's Hall. But honestly, it looks more like a wrestling match that got frozen in time. This room is a chaotic explosion of tension. Everywhere you look, massive limbs of wood are locked in a silent, screaming struggle. You see beams the size of telephone poles that have been bent into U-shapes, their fibers stretched to the breaking point, held in place by other beams wrapped around them, like boa constrictors. This isn't carpentry. Carpentry is geometry. It's straight lines and right angles. This is bondage. You approach a massive junction in the center of the room. It looks like a giant wooden fist. 5 separate trunks converge here. Woven into a not-so-complex, it makes a sailor's carrick bend look like a shoelace. But here's the kicker. They aren't just tied, they are fused. You run your hand over the knot, it's slick and hard as stone. You can't find the beginning or the end of any single strand. The bark has flowed together, creating a single, massive callus. This is the structural secret of the Green Horizon. In a stone arch, gravity pushes everything down, compressing the stones together. It's a compression structure, but trees are designed to sway in the wind. They are tension structures. The architects didn't build a pile of wood. They built a suspension bridge that goes in a circle. Here is a mainstream historical fact to help you visualize this. In the state of Meghalaya, India, the Khasi people have been building living root bridges for centuries. They guide the aerial roots of the rubber fig tree across rivers using hollowed-out betel nut trunks. Over decades, the roots reach the other side, take root in the soil, and thicken. The bridges get stronger with age, not weaker. Some can hold 50 people at once. The structure you are standing in right now is that exact same technology, but instead of bridging a river, it's bridging the sky. But the scale here implies a level of mathematical understanding that is frankly terrifying. To weave a knot this size, you have to know exactly how much the tree will grow in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. If you tie it too tight, you strangle the sap flow, and the limb dies, and the roof collapses. If you tie it too loose, the knot slips, and the roof collapses. This brings us to the weavers. Local oral traditions whisper of a specific caste known as the bone breakers. The name sounds violent, but it referred to the bones of the trees, not people. These workers were responsible for the initial bending of the saplings. Legends say they used massive winches made of braided leather and counterweights of stone to force the young ironwood trees into these unnatural curves. They would hold them there for years, constantly adjusting the tension, massaging the bark to encourage the welding process. Imagine a construction site where the steel girders are fighting back. That was their Tuesday. You look up at the ceiling. It's a lattice of tension. It looks like the underside of a woven basket. but one capable of supporting millions of pounds of biomass above it. You realize that if you were to cut a single one of these major tendons, the whole room might not collapse, but it would twang. The shock wave would ripple through the entire pyramid. Historians still argue whether the weavers used a form of biological maquette growing, miniature versions of the structure using fast-growing vines to test the stress points before committing to the central-long project of the main build. It's the organic equivalent of a wind tunnel test. If the Vina model collapsed, they knew not to plant the real trees in that configuration. There is a quirky, slightly disturbing detail about the knot you're standing next to. Embedded deep in the center of the fusion, barely visible under the layers of overgrown bark, is a piece of metal. You shine your light on it. It's the tip of a spear, or maybe a large chisel. It's rusted, almost completely swallowed by the wood. Was it a tool left behind by a careless worker? Or was it a reinforcement? Some theories suggest that, for the highest stress joints, the architects would insert iron rods into the core of the young bundle. As the trees grew, they would envelope the iron, creating a reinforced concrete effect, but with wood and iron. Reinforced timber, it would explain how they achieved spans that should be impossible for wood alone. The creaking sound you heard earlier returns. You can see the knot in front of you actually shift a microscopic movement, maybe a millimeter. The building is adjusting its posture. It's unnerving. In a skyscraper, if the support beams move, you run. Here, it's just the house getting comfortable. You walk around the perimeter of the weaver's hall. The floor here is uneven, rising and falling over the massive ruknis that anchor the tension cables. You have to watch your step. It's dark in here, darker than the rest of the structure so far. The light from the entrance is long gone, and the air shafts don't reach this deep into the core. You check your flashlight, the battery indicator is blinking. You have spares, of course, but the darkness here feels heavy. It's a physical weight. You are deep inside a solid object. If your light goes out, you are effectively blind in a cave made of wood. That thought brings you to a practical question. How did they see? The architects and the weavers spent their lives in these deep, sunless chambers. You can't burn torches, and here fire is the one thing this city fears more than anything. The smoke would choke the ventilation system, and the risk of igniting the dry inner bark is too high. You don't light a campfire inside a tree. So, did they work in the dark? Did they use mirrors to reflect sunlight down miles of tunnels? No, that's too complex for these twisting corridors. You spot something on the wall. It's a patch of moss, but it's not green. It's a pale, ghostly white. And as you accidentally sweep your flashlight beam away from it for a split second, you swear it glowed. You turn your light off. Total, suffocating blackness. You count to 3, letting your eyes adjust. And then, the room begins to wake up. Faintly at first, then stronger, a network of soft, blue-green veins begins to appear on the walls. It's not moss, it's fungus. The weaver's hall isn't pitch black. It's bathed in the eerie underwater glow of bioluminescence. You are looking at the ancient world's solution to the light bulb. You turn your flashlight back on because, let's be real, the ghost light is cool but creepy, and the glow vanishes, drowned out by the LED. You are about to leave the structural gymnastics of the Weaver-S Hall and venture into the navigation system of the dark tunnels. You are heading toward bioluminescent navigation, and you're going to find out that the architects didn't just farm trees, they farmed light. You stand there in the Weaver's Hall, thumb hovering over the power button of your flashlight. You know you shouldn't do it. Every survival instinct you have is screaming that turning off your only light source deep inside a subterranean labyrinth is the first step in a found-footage horror movie. But curiosity is a powerful drug. You take a breath, close your eyes to prepare for the darkness, and click the button. Click, you open your eyes. For a second, there is nothing. Just the crushing weight of the blackness. But then, as your rhodopsin levels adjust, the room begins to ignite. It starts as a faint haze, like the afterimage of a TV screen, but quickly sharpens into a stunning neon reality. The walls are not black. They are burning with a cold, ghostly fire. You are witnessing the green horizon's grid. Everywhere you look along, the massive tension knots tracing the archways. And lining the floorboards, there are patches of intense blue-green luminescence. This isn't magic, it's biology. You are looking at Panella stypticus, or perhaps a cultivated variant of Armillaria malea, the honey mushroom. In the West, we call this phenomenon foxfire. It occurs when fungi digests decaying wood, a chemical reaction involving luciferin and oxygen that releases light. It's the same science behind a firefly's butt, just smeared across a wall. But this isn't the random patchy rot you'd find on a dead log in the woods. This is organized. You step closer to the wall, guided by the spectral glow. The fungi have been grown in precise, continuous lines, forming perfect strips of lighting at waist height. It's exactly like the emergency strip lighting on an airplane floor. The architects didn't just tolerate this rot, they farmed it. Here is a mainstream historical fact to ground this sci-fi moment. Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist, wrote about people using glowing wood as torches to light their way through forests. In World War I, soldiers in the trenches would sometimes pin pieces of glowing rotting timber to their helmets or bayonets to identify each other in the dark without alerting the enemy snipers. It emits light, but no heat. It's the original tactical stealth tech. The atmosphere in here is completely transformed. The heavy industrial feel of the structural beams is gone, replaced by an ethereal, underwater vibe. You feel like you're diving in the deep ocean. The light is soft, diffuse, and steady. It doesn't flicker like a torch. It casts no hard shadows. It just exists, bathing everything in a radioactive booking twilight. You notice something clever about the layout. The lines on the floor aren't all the same color. Most are that standard eerie green. This implies the existence of the myco-alchemist, the guild, responsible for the lighting. Historians still argue whether they managed to alter the pH balance of the wood substrate to change the color of the bioluminescence, or if they simply discovered different species of fungi for different zones. Imagine navigating a city where the red line isn't a subway train, but a corridor infested with a specific scarlet glowing mold. You follow the green strip, it seems to be the main arterial route. As you walk, you spot a quirky, practical detail that makes you smile. At regular intervals, there are small hollowed-out gourds hanging from hooks on the wall. You look inside one. It's filled with a thick, pungent paste that smells like rotting fruit. This is fuel the fungi need to eat. If the wood dries out or runs out of nutrients, the lights go out. You can imagine a low-ranking workerlet, call him the wick trimmer, walking these halls every week with a bucket of compost jam, smearing it onto the fungal strips to keep the city glowing. It's a dirty job, but someone had to keep the lights on. There is a fringe theory that suggests this lighting system had a secondary psychoactive purpose. Some of the fungi used in the region are known to release spores that can cause mild hallucinations or altered states of consciousness. Was the Green Horizon designed to keep its inhabitants in a perpetual dreamlike trance? Were the architects literally high on their own supply? As you breathe in the slightly musty air, you hope not. You need your wits about you. You reach a section where the tunnel splits. The green line goes left, and the yellow line goes right. The yellow line is flanked by intricate carvings in the wood symbols that look like open eyes. You decide to follow the yellow brick road, or rather the yellow mold road. The tunnel narrows. The bioluminescence here is brighter, more intense. It feels purposeful. The walls are smoother, polished to a mirror shine that reflects the glow, doubling the light. You are approaching something important. Suddenly, you see a dimmer switch. It's a simple, brilliant mechanism. A large flap of bark is hinged over a particularly bright patch of fungi. When the flap is down, the light is blocked. When you lift it, the light floods out. It's a manual override. You play with it for a second: light, dark, dark. It's such a human thing. We need to control our environment. Even if we live in a tree, we still want to be able to turn the lights off when we go to sleep. The yellow line ends abruptly at a massive circular door. This isn't a leaf gate like the entrance. This is a solid plug of heartwood sealed with resin. The glowing fungi form a ring around it, highlighting the intricate glyphs carved into its surface. These aren't just decorations, they look like text. You have arrived at the sap archives. You realize that a civilization that builds with biology probably doesn't write on paper. Paper rots, paper burns. If you want to leave a message that lasts 1,000 years in a rainforest, you don't use ink. You use something that hardens, something that turns to stone. You push against the heavy wooden plug, it swings inward on silent, well-oiled, or well-sapped pivots. You step inside, your flashlight beam cutting through the gentle fungal glow, and catch the glint of something golden. Not gold metal, but gold liquid that has frozen in time. You are about to read the history of this place, written in the blood of the trees. You step across the threshold into the room, and for a moment, you forget you are underground. You forget the bugs, the humidity, and the terrifying wall of thorns outside. The sap archives are quite possibly the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. The walls of this circular chamber are lined not with shelves, but with massive translucent panels of hardened resin. Imagine a library where every book is made of stained glass. The bioluminescent fungi from the hallway outside provide a soft backlight, but when you sweep your high-powered flashlight across the room, the space erupts into a kaleidoscope of gold, ochre, and deep blood-red amber. You walk up to the nearest panel. It's about the size of a door, smooth to the touch and cool. Deep inside the golden suspension, you see dark, suspended shapes. These are unt letters in the way we understand them, not AS and BS, or hieroglyphs scratched onto the surface. These are three-dimensional objects and symbols floating in the medium, preserved in perfect, suspended animation. This is the hard drive of the green horizon. Mainstream history tells us that West African societies, particularly the Ashanti and Akan, relied heavily on oral tradition, the griot or okayim, who memorized the history of the tribe. Writing was often seen as less vital than the spoken word. But here, the architects seem to have combined the two. They didn't trust paper in this climate. Humidity eats paper for breakfast, and termites eat it for lunch. They needed a medium that was waterproof, rot-proof, and time-proof. They chose the blood of the trees. The substance is likely copal, a semi-fossilized resin produced by the copifera tree native to West Africa. In its liquid state, it's sticky and viscous. The resin scribes would pour a layer, place a symbol or an object to specific seed. A gold weight, a carved piece of ebony, and layer by layer, they built up a historical record that is literally frozen in time. You lean in closer to examine the text. You recognize the symbols. They are Adinkra symbols, the visual language of the Akan people. You spot the Ghanaian, except for God, signifying the supremacy of the divine. But then you see one that hits a little too close to home given your current location, Sankofa. It's depicted as a bird with its head turned backward, taking an egg off its back. It translates roughly to go back and fetch it. It means you can't move forward until you understand your past. It's the motto of this entire podcast, honestly, but here's the kicker: the depth matters. Historians still argue about the z-axis syntax theory. The idea is that the chronological order of the story isn't read left to right, but deep to shallow. The objects buried deepest in the resin are the oldest events. The ones near the surface are recent. You are looking at a geological timeline of a civilization suspended in honey. There is a fringe theory that suggests this method wasn't just visual. Some acoustic archaeologists, yes, that's a real job title, though usually they study caves, believe that the resin might act like a rudimentary phonograph record. The theory goes that the resin scribes would chant or sing into the wet resin as it set. The microscopic vibrations of their voices would ripple the surface of the liquid, freezing those sound waves into the material as it hardened. If we had the right laser stylus, we might be able to play these walls and hear the voices of the people who built them. It's a wild idea, effectively suggesting the walls are MP3 files. But in a place this strange, I'm not ruling anything out. You move to the next panel. It's darker, filled with a dense cloud of what looks like soot or ash suspended in the amber. This likely records a year of great fire or volcanic activity, Black Year. The preservation is absolute. If you broke this panel open, please don't. You'd destroy history, and I'd have to report you. You could probably analyze that ash and tell me exactly what forest burned down in the year 1250. But not everything here is serious. You spot a flaw in one of the pristine golden slabs. Right next to a solemn carving of a king's profile, there is a small black speck. Shine your light on it. It's a fly, a common housefly trapped in the resin 1,000 years ago. It's the ancient equivalent of a typo. You can imagine the scribe cursing as the fly landed in his wet masterpiece, trying to fish it out, and finally just deciding, screw it, it's part of the history now. It's a hilarious, humanizing moment. Even master engineers deal with bugs in the code. The sheer volume of resin in this room represents an industrial effort. Tapping trees for this amount of sap would have killed them if done all at once. This implies a sustainable harvest rotation that spanned generations. They weren't just building a library, they were farming it. You step back to the center of the room. The acoustics here are deadened. unlike the echoey xylem tunnels. The resin absorbs sound. It's the quietest place in the pyramid. It feels like a tomb, but not a sad one. It's a vault of memory. You notice a series of smaller, portable slabs stacked in a corner. These look like tablets. Maybe these were the paperbacks of the Green Horizon messages sent between cities, or perhaps legal deeds. One of them has a jagged edge, as if it was snapped in half. A broken contract, a divorce decree, or just a dropped iPad, Bronze Age style. The guide signals you he's standing by, a narrow staircase that spirals upward, carved directly into the heartwood. We are done with the basement. We've seen the plumbing, the structural knots, and the library. Now it's time to see where the people actually lived. We are heading up into the canopy layers to the chambers of the living. As you leave the golden glow of the SAP archives, you have to wonder, if our civilization collapsed tomorrow, what would we leave behind? Corrupted hard drives, cloud servers that no one can access. These people left their story in a format that looks like jewelry and lasts like stone. They wanted to be remembered. And looking at that Sankofa bird staring back at you from the amber, you realize they knew we would eventually come looking. You grab the handrail, which is, naturally, a polished rutand start to climb. The air is getting warmer again, but it smells different now. Less like damp earth and more like cooking. Is that smoke? You are about to enter the residential district, and if you're lucky, you might just find out what a tree city smells like when it's dinner time. You climb higher, your boots thudding softly against the spiral staircase that is carved directly into the heartwood of the central trunk. As you ascend, the claustrophobic, resin-scented air of the archives begins to dissipate. The darkness lightens, shifting from the heavy black of the roots to a dappled, verdant twilight. You are emerging from the trunk and entering the crown. You are stepping into the chambers of the living. This is where the Green Horizon stops being a machine and starts being a home. You step off the staircase onto a platform that feels surprisingly bouncy. You look down. You aren't standing on wood anymore. You are standing on a thick, interwoven mat of vines and fibrous bark, layered with dried rushes. It's a suspension floor. The entire residential district is essentially a series of massive hammocks strung between the structural pillars of the ceiba trees. The layout here is baffling to a modern eye, used to grids and corridors. There are no straight lines. The hallway you are walking down is a winding organic tunnel formed by the overarching branches of the trees, manipulated to grow into a vaulted ceiling. To your left and right are opening circular or oval apertures that lead into the private quarters. You duck your head and step into one of these rooms. It's cozy, small, spherical, and incredibly airy. The walls are not solid wood, but a tight lattice of thinner branches, covered on the outside by a dense layer of broad leaves. It's like being inside a wicker basket that has been waterproofed with foliage. During the day, the sunlight filters through the green leaves, filling the room with a soft emerald glow that is naturally calming. It's the original mood lighting. But the detail that makes you stop and stare is the furniture. In a normal house, you bring the furniture in. You buy a bed, you drag in a table. Here, the furniture is the house. You look at the bed, it's a raised platform that grows seamlessly out of the floor. The architects grafted branches from the floor joists, guided them upward, and wove them into a flat frame that was then padded with moss or textiles. The shelves are just branches that were coaxed to grow horizontally out of the wall. You couldn't rearrange the living room in the Green Horizon because the living room was rooted in place. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. Traditional West African architecture, particularly among the Ashanti, centers around the concept of the courtyard compound. A family lives in separate rooms that all face inward toward a central open-air communal space. It's a design that prioritizes community and privacy simultaneously. The architects didn't abandon this just because they went vertical. You step back out into the hallway and realize it opens up into a larger, communal clearing a courtyard in the sky. The canopy above is thinned out here to let in direct sunlight. In the center, there's a shallow depression in the floor, lined with clay. This was likely a communal hearth or a gathering spot. You can imagine families sitting here, 300 feet in the air, cooking dinner while the wind rustles the walls of their home. But living in a tree presents a very specific logistical problem: waste. If you live on the ground, you dig a latrine. If you live in the penthouse of a living pyramid, you can't exactly just toss your trash out the window, not unless you want to start a war with the neighbors downstairs. you spot a series of small, dark chutes located near the communal areas. They are lined with slick, resinous bark and angle sharply downward. These are the digestive tracts of the city. Getty Images, KHM, PH. Historians believe these chutes connected to a complex anaerobic composting system located in the lower root, layers distinct from the freshwater plumbing we saw earlier. The waste would slide down, be broken down by specialized beetles and fungi, the rotsmiths again, and the resulting nutrient-rich slurry would be fed directly back into the taproots of the pyramid itself. It is the ultimate closed loop. The inhabitants fed the tree, and the tree housed the inhabitants. It's a level of recycling that makes your blue bin look pathetic. There is a scholarly debate that gets pretty heated regarding the social hierarchy of these levels. In modern skyscrapers, the penthouse is for the rich. The higher you go, the more expensive it gets. But some archaeologists argue the inverse was true here. The inverted status theory suggests that the elite lived closer to the ground, near the water reservoirs and the easy exits. The upper canopy where you are nowsways significantly in high winds. During a storm, this entire residential zone would be moving. It might have been the cheap seats, reserved for the working class or the leaf tenders, while the nobility enjoyed the stability of the massive lower trunks. Standing here, feeling the floor gently tremble with a gust of wind, you can see the logic in that. Motion sickness might have been a marker of poverty. You walk to the edge of the platform, where the wall thins out to form a window. You push aside a heavy curtain of vines and look out. The view is vertigo-inducing. You are high above the jungle floor. You can see the dark, undulating ocean of the rainforest canopy stretching out to the horizon. But more importantly, you can see the other pyramids in the distance. The green horizon wasn't one building, it was a cluster. You see the faint silhouettes of other peaks, connected to this one by slender, terrifyingly thin bridges made of woven vines. These sky roads allowed people to travel between the pyramids without ever touching the dangerous, predator-filled ground. It was a highway system for pedestrians, suspended in the clouds. You can imagine messengers sprinting across these swaying bridges, carrying news from the saber-toothed sector to the river sector. The atmosphere in these residential chambers feels ghostly. Unlike the industrial zones below, which felt preserved and functional, this feels abandoned. You see a small, carved Toya wooden animal, maybe a leopard lodged in a crevice of the wall. You see the scorch marks of a cooking fire that went out centuries ago. It's the silence of a house where the family just stepped out and never came back. You take a deep breath. The air here smells of chlorophyll and old smoke. It's fresh, oxygenic. You are breathing the exhaust of the building. But a city this size has another massive requirement: food. You can't just eat bark. And while the jungle is full of fruit, hunting and gathering can't support a population density that requires skyscrapers. They needed agriculture. But where do you put a farm when you don't have fields? You look out the window again, squinting at the sloping exterior wall of the pyramid next to you. It doesn't look like a smooth forest canopy. It looks terraced. It looks like a staircase of green. You realize that the outside of the pyramid wasn't just camouflage. It was a garden. They didn't just build with plants. They covered the building in plants they could eat. You are looking at the ancient ancestor of the vertical farm. You turn away from the window, leaving the swaying, empty bedrooms behind. You need to see how they fueled this engine. You are heading for the vertical farms, and you're about to realize that locally sourced takes on a whole new meaning when your salad is growing on your roof. You carefully squeeze through the narrow opening in the residential canopy and step out onto the roof. Only it isn't really a roof, and it isn't really a wall. It's a farm. You are standing on a ledge about 4 feet wide, carved directly into the living flank of the pyramid, 300 feet in the air. The wind hits you harder here, whipping your hair across your face, but the view is obscured by a wall of green. You aren't looking at wild jungle vines anymore. You are looking at dinner. This is the vertical farm of the green horizon, and it effectively shatters the modern assumption that agriculture requires flat land and a tractor. You look up the slope of the pyramid. It's terraced. Thousands of these narrow ledges ring the structure, stepping up toward the summit like a giant green staircase. This design does two things. It acts as a massive erosion control system, preventing the heavy rains from washing the pyramid away. And it provides acres of arable surface area that receives direct sunlight. It is the ancient equivalent of a hydroponic skyscraper. The crop selection here is fascinating. You push aside a large heart-shaped leaf and see a familiar shape hanging from a vine, suspended in a mesh net woven from grass. It's a yam. In West Africa, the yam is king. It is the staple carbohydrate, the cultural anchor, and the center of festivals like Odera. But yams usually grow underground. Digging them up out of a living tree wall would be a nightmare. So, the architects improvised. They bred or trained a variety of aerial yam Dioscorea bulbifera. Instead of burying the tuber in the soil, they encouraged the plant to produce the edible bulbils on the vine itself, hanging in the air like heavy, starchy fruit. You can just pluck them, no digging required. It's a pick-and-eat system that eliminates the back-breaking labor of the harvest. You examine the soil in the planter box at your feet. It's dark, almost black, and smells rich and sweet. This isn't just dirt hauled up from the forest floor. This is engineered earth. Mainstream history acknowledges the existence of terra preta in the Amazon man-made, charcoal-rich soil that regenerates itself. It seems the soil alchemists of Ghana developed a similar technology. They likely mixed charcoal dust from cooking fires, bone meal, and the composted waste from the residential shoots we saw earlier to create a super soil that is incredibly lightweight but nutrient. This kept the structural load on the pyramid manageable. They weren't farming in dirt. They were farming in a concentrate. But a farm needs water, and you are a long way from the river. You hear a faint trickle. You look at the inner wall of the terrace. There is a bamboo pipe running horizontally with small holes drilled at precise intervals. Water is dripping out of its low, steady, rhythmic. This is the terminus of the massive hydraulic system we saw in the basement. The water is pumped up the central heartwood, cools the air in the ventilation shafts, and then is gravity-fewed down the exterior skin to irrigate the crops. It is a nutrient cascade. The water likely picks up minerals and nutrients as it travels through the organic pipes of the pyramid, effectively turning this into a massive drip irrigation fertigation system. There is a quirky, slightly terrifying detail about pest control up here. You see a series of small clay pots hanging from the eaves of the terrace above you. They are buzzing. You freeze bees. The architects didn't just need water, they needed pollination. You are looking at the apiary ring. But knowing this civilization, these aren't your friendly neighborhood honeybees. These are likely Africanized honeybees, highly defensive. The legends speak of the buzzing guard. During peacetime, the bees pollinated the vertical farms. During a siege, the defenders could simply smash a few of these clay pots and unleash a cloud of angry, venomous insects on the climbers below. It's a dual-use technology, agriculture and aerodynamic weaponry. You decide to step very, very softly past the clay pots. Historians still argue about the shadow rotation theory. Since a pyramid has 4 sides and the sun moves across the sky, one side is always going to be in the shade. Did they rotate the crops? Or did they plant shadow-tolerant species like mushrooms and ferns on the dark side, and sun-loving peppers and yams on the light side? Some evidence suggests they might have used polished mica mirrors to reflect sunlight around corners, literally bending the day to feed the north face. You continue along the ledge, stepping over creeping vines of cowpeas and agouti melon. The efficiency is staggering. This is a Three Sisters planting method: corn, beans, squash adapted for verticality. The trees provide the structure. The legumes fix nitrogen in the soil to feed the trees, and the broad-leafed melons cover the soil to prevent moisture evaporation. It's a perfect symbiotic circle. But as you look closer at a patch of peppers, you notice something odd. They are growing out of a section of the wall that looks scarred. The bark here is gnarled and thick. This brings up a fringe theory: botanical grafting as architecture. Some researchers believe that the food plants weren't just planted in boxes. They were grafted directly into the vascular system of the main structure. Imagine a city where the walls themselves bleed fruit juice. If this is true, the pyramid wasn't just a trellis. It was the mother plant, feeding its parasitic crops directly from its own sap. It blurs the line between building and organism to a point that makes you uncomfortable. You pluck a small red pepper from a vine. Don't eat it. Ancient peppers were bred for heat, not flavor, probably to kill intestinal parasites. You'd regret it for days. You roll it in your fingers. It's firm, fresh. Even after centuries of abandonment, the genetic legacy of these crops persists, fighting the jungle for dominance. You reach the end of the agricultural terrace. The path curves back inside, ducking under a heavy lintel of fused roots. You are leaving the grocery store and heading toward the pharmacy. Because in a jungle, you don't just get hungry, you get sick. You get bitten by snakes, you get fevers, you get infections. In a civilization this advanced didn't rely on luck to survive. They had a healthcare system, but they didn't have pills in blister packs. They had a vault. You duck back into the humid twilight of the interior. The smell of rich soil and sun-warmed leaves fades, replaced by a scent that is sharp, medicinal, and overpowering. It smells like eucalyptus, camphor, and bitter roots. You are entering the pharmacopoeia vault, and you are about to see how the green horizon treated a headache and how they treated a severed limb. You step out of the humid, sun-drenched vertical farm and back into the shadow of the pyramid's interior. The transition is jarring. Your eyes struggle to adjust to the gloom, but your nose knows exactly where you are. The air here doesn't smell like cooking fires or wet wood anymore. It smells sharp, astringent, and incredibly clean. It's a cocktail of crushed eucalyptus, dried ginger, and something bitter that coats the back of your throat. You have found the pharmacopoeia vault in any civilization. Keeping people alive is job number one. But in a rainforest, that job is infinitely harder. The jungle is a biological weapons lab. There are parasites in the water, fevers in the mosquitoes, and infections waiting on every thorn. To survive here at this density, the Green Horizon couldn't just rely on a few village healers. They needed industrial-scale pharmaceutical production. You are standing in a long, narrow corridor located just behind the outer shell of the pyramid. The walls here are honeycombed with thousands of small, circular alcoves. It looks like a massive wine rack, but instead of vintage Merlot, these cubbies hold the chemical defense system of the Empire. You reach into one of the alcoves and pull out a container. It's a section of bamboo, sealed at both ends with a heavy plug of beeswax. You shake it, it rattles. You carefully pry off the cap using your thumbnail, which you will definitely regret later, and tip the contents into your palm. Dried leaves. They are brittle, crumbling at the edges, but they still hold a faint, minty aroma. This is likely Lipia multiflora, or Gambian tea, used for generations in West Africa to treat fevers and hypertension. But the preservation is what's baffling. In this humidity, these leaves should have turned to mush centuries ago. The architects must have developed a method of dehydration, perhaps using the heat from the ventilation shafts, or packing the herbs with desiccants, like silicate clay that rivals modern vacuum sealing. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. West African traditional medicine is not witchcraft, it is science. The World Health Organization estimates that 80% of the population in some African countries still uses traditional medicine. Plants like Cryptolepis sanguinenta have been proven to have potent anti-malarial properties. The people who built this place weren't guessing. They were chemists. They just didn't use test tubes. They used gourds. You move down the line, the containers change. Some are clay pots sealed with leather. Some are actual hollowed-out fruit shells. You find one labeled with a glyph that looks like a fractured bone. Inside, you find a sticky black paste. It smells like tar. This is likely a bone-setting compound, a mixture of comfrey-like roots and sea butter designed to harden like a cast when applied to a broken limb. But the most fascinating part of the vault is the live storage. You stop in front of a section of the wall that is covered in a lush, hanging carpet of moss. It looks like decoration, but when you shine your light on it, you see that the moss is growing on top of a specific, spongy fungus. There is a fringe theory called the mycoantibiotic hypothesis. We know that Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin by accident in 1928 when mold killed his bacteria samples. But some cryptobotanists believe the Ghanaian engineers were cultivating specific strains of penicillium or similar antibiotic molds on these walls purposefully. If you got an infection, the healer wouldn't give you a pill. They would scrape a bit of living mud off the wall and slap it on your wound. You are looking at a living petri dish that might have saved thousands of lives. Historians still argue whether this medical knowledge was democratized or strictly controlled. Was this vault open to the public like a modern pharmacy? Or was it the domain of a secretive priesthood, the keepers of the bitter root, who used their monopoly on medicine to maintain political power? Looking at the heavy wooden gate at the end of the corridor, which has clearly been bashed in from the outside, it suggests that at some point, the people decided they didn't want to wait for a prescription. You come across a section of the vault that feels ... different. The alcoves here are marked with red clay. The glyphs are jagged. Warning: you carefully pull out a small, heavy pot. It's sealed with red wax. This is the Dulu section. In botany, the difference between medicine and poison is often just dosage. The Physostigma venenosum, or Calabar bean, contains physostigmine in small doses. It can treat glaucoma. In large doses, it causes respiratory paralysis and death. It was historically used in ordeal trials to determine guilt. If you vomited the bean up, you were innocent. If you digested it and died, you were guilty. A terrible legal system, but a very effective deterrent. The architects kept the cures right next to the killers. It's a sobering reminder that this society lived on a knife edge. They had the power to heal, but they also stockpiled the power to end life efficiently. You carefully put the red pot back. You don't want to accidentally drop that and become the subject of a 1,000-year-old murder mystery. As you reach the end of the pharmacopoeia vault, you notice a large hollowed-out section of the floor. It looks like a mixing bowl carved directly into the root wood. There are pestles the size of baseball bats lying nearby. This was the compounding station. You can imagine the healers here, grinding roots and mixing pastes, the air thick with dust and chanting. But there's something missing. You've seen the homes, the farms, the water, and the medicine, but you haven't seen how they coordinated it all. A city this complex needs a nervous system. It needs a way to send a message from the pharmacopoeia to the weaver's hall without running up and down 30 flights of stairs. You hear a sound. It's faint, coming from a vertical shaft in the corner of the room. It's not the wind this time. It's a voice, or ... an echo of a voice. It sounds like a whisper, distorted and traveling over a long distance, ... coming. You freeze. You look at your guide. He looks just as spooked as you are. The sound came from a smooth, polished wooden tube that protrudes from the wall like a trumpet. You are about to discover the internet of the green horizon. It doesn't use fiber optics. It uses the unique acoustic properties of tropical hardwood. You are heading to echoes of the wood, and you might just overhear a conversation that ended centuries ago, or one that is happening right now. You lean in closer to the smooth, trumpet-shaped opening carved into the wall. The wood is polished to a shine so deep it looks like dark glass, worn down by generations of cheeks pressing against it and generations of hands cupping it to shout secrets. You hold your breath, straining to hear over the thumping of your own heart. ... Check the gate. It's faint, distorted, and sounds like it's coming from the bottom of a well, but it's there, a voice. You pull back, eyes wide, looking at your guide. He just shrugs, unbothered, and taps the wood with his knuckle. It rings with a clear musical tone like a marimba bar. You have stumbled upon the nervous system of the green horizon. In a city this vertical, running messages by foot is inefficient. If the guys in the weaver's hall need to tell the guys in the pharmacopoeia that a structural beam is cracking, they can't wait 20 minutes for a runner to sprint up the stairs. They need speed. They need the acoustic web. The architects didn't just build with wood, they tuned it. You are looking at a complex network of speaking tubes, similar to the ones used on old battleships to communicate between the bridge and the engine room. But those were made of brass. These are made of Cordia millinae, or the African drum tree. This wood is legendary for its resonant properties. The same timber used to make the famous talking drums of the region. Here is a mainstream historical fact to anchor this. The talking drum, a tumpan of the Ashanti people, is a surrogate for human speech. It mimics the tone and prosody of the Twi language so perfectly that skilled drummers can transmit complex messages, poems, warnings, genealogy, cross miles of forest. It was the original wireless telegraph. The architects took this concept and hardwired it into the walls. They hollowed out long continuous branches, polished the interiors with abrasive sand and wax to minimize sound dampening, and routed them through the structure like telephone lines. You put your ear back to the horn. The voice is gone, replaced by the low, mournful moaning of the wind moving through the external vents. Was it a ghost? A trick of the acoustics? Or is there someone else in the pyramid? Let's just assume it's the wind for now, so you don't have a panic attack. The engineering required to build this is mind-boggling. Sound waves degrade over distance. They lose energy to keep the signal clear over hundreds of feet of twisting wooden pipe. The soundsmiths likely used acoustic mirrors, parabolic reflectors carved into the turns of the tubes to focus and bounce the sound waves, keeping them coherent. It's the same principle used in whispering galleries in cathedrals, where you can whisper into a wall and be heard clearly on the other side of the dome. Historians still argue whether this system was an open public address network or a restricted, encrypted channel. Some argue that the tubes were accessible to everyone, a chaotic party line where citizens could chat with neighbors 3 floors up. Others believe it was strictly military, a commandant control loop used to coordinate the defenses of the thorns and the release of the bees. Imagine the terrifying efficiency of a silent alarm rippling through the walls, mobilizing an entire city without a single shout being raised. There is a quirky, slightly paranoid fringe theory known as the panopticon of roots. Some researchers suggest that the architects didn't just build these tubes for communication, they built them for surveillance. The theory goes that there are listening posts hidden deep in the core of the structure, where the tubes from the private residential quarters terminate. A central authority could sit in the dark and listen to the conversations of the citizens in their bedrooms. It turns the green horizon into a literal police state, where the walls really do have ears. You tap your fingernail against the rim of the tube, tap, tap, tap. A second later, you hear a faint echo return, tap, tap, tap. It's just your own sound bouncing back, but the clarity is chilling. The fidelity is so high you can hear the texture of the scratch. This brings us to the code of the wood. You couldn't just yell down these tubes all dat, would be a cacophony. The inhabitants likely developed a shorthand, a Morse code of knocks, scratches, and drum-like beats. A rapid drum roll meant fire. A slow, rhythmic scratching meant a storm was coming. A specific sequence of 3 knocks might mean, send up more yams, we're out. You follow the conduit pipe as it runs along the wall. It disappears into the floor, heading down toward the merchant levels. It makes sense. Commerce requires communication. You need to know the price of gold dust, the arrival of caravans, the inventory of salt. The internet of this place was likely driven by the same thing that drives ours: money. But there is something unsettling about the silence that hangs over it now. A communication system without voices is the loneliest thing in the world. It's a dead phone line. You feel a sudden, intense urge to shout hello down the tube just to break the spell, but you don't. This is a place of respectful silence. And also, if something shouted back hello from the darkness below, you'd probably have to leave the podcast right there and run for your life. As you step away from the acoustic shaft, you notice curious markings around the tube's opening. They are carved notches, worn smooth, tally marks, or perhaps volume settings. Maybe you could physically choke the tube to turn down the volume of your screaming neighbor. The guide motions you toward a wider ramp that spirals downward. You are leaving the specialized, high-tech zones of medicine and communication and heading into the engine room of the economy. The air begins to smell different again. The medicinal temps of the pharmacopoeia and the clean ozone smell of the ventilation shafts are replaced by a scent that is dusty, metallic, and old. It smells like greed. You are descending into the merchant sector. In a civilization, this advanced trade was the lifeblood. And in West Africa, trade meant one thing above all else: gold. You are about to enter the gold dust economy, where you'll see that the floorboards aren't just made of wood. They are impregnated with the glitter of 1 billion transactions. And you might just find out why the richest people in the city lived closest to the ground. You descend the wide spiraling ramp into the belly of the beast. The air here is heavier, warmer, and smells distinctively of old leather, dried spices, and that unmistakable metallic temps that says money changed hands here. You have entered the merchant sector, the economic engine room of the green horizon. The architecture shifts dramatically. Up in the residential canopy, everything was private, enclosed, and woven for intimacy. Here, it is open plan. The massive ceiba trunks are spaced further apart, creating a cavernous hall that feels like a subterranean bazaar. The floor is no longer the springy woven vine mat of the bedrooms. It is hard, polished heartwood, dark as ebony. But if you shine your flashlight at your feet, the floor explodes. It glitters. Millions of tiny sparks reflect your beam, looking like the night sky inverted. You kneel down to touch it. The wood is embedded with microscopic flecks of metal. You are walking on gold. This is the physical legacy of the gold dust economy. In the great empires of West Africa, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and Ashanti, gold wasn't just jewelry, it was currency. But they didn't typically use minted coins with a king's face on them. They used dust. Gold dust was the standard unit of exchange for everything from a bag of salt to a head of cattle. Merchants carried pouches of dust and intricate scales to weigh out payments. Here is a mainstream historical fact. The Akan people, which includes the Ashanti, developed a sophisticated system of brass weights, known as maramu, to measure this gold dust. These weights were cast in the form of miniature figures, people, proverbs, and everyday objects. They were art, but they were also the calculator. A weight shaped like a bird might equal a specific value of gold dust. But here's the thing about dust. It's messy. Every time a transaction happened, a pouch opened, a scale tipped, a sneeze suppressed, a few grains would float away. Over centuries of millions of transactions, that lost chaff settled onto the wooden floor. The humidity and the resin used to polish the wood trapped it, and the pressure of thousands of feet hammered it into the grain. The floor of this market is literally plated in the lost change of an empire. There is a quirky, slightly criminal historical detail associated with this phenomenon. Legends speak of the floor thieves. These were individuals, often young children or desperate poor who would sneak into the market districts of great cities at night with wet clay attached to the soles of their feet. They would walk the floors, picking up the loose dust, then wash the clay to recover the gold. It was the ancient equivalent of sweeping under the vending machine, but much more lucrative. You see a series of low wooden platforms arranged in a grid. These were the stalls. They are empty now, stripped of their wares, but you can still see the deep grooves worn into the wood where the merchants sat cross-legged, day after day, year after year. You spot a small object wedged in a crack of one of these stalls. You pry it out with your knife. It's a brass figure, no bigger than your thumb. It depicts two crocodiles sharing a single stomach. This is a classic Adinkra symbol. Funtan funfun. It represents unity and diversity. We share the same stomach, so why do we fight over food? It's a poignant thing to find in a market, a place defined by competition. It was likely a gold weight dropped by a merchant during a haggling match 500 years ago and lost to the darkness until you picked it up. But gold wasn't the only thing moving through here. You walk toward a section of the hall where the wood is bleached white, almost bone-like. You run your finger over a stall counter and it tastes salty. Okay, seriously, stop tasting the ruins, but trust me on this one, this was the salt exchange. In the trans-Saharan trade networks, salt was worth its weight in gold. It was essential for life in the tropics, to preserve food and replace electrolytes lost to sweating. The Green Horizon likely imported massive slabs of rock salt from the mines in the north, hauling them up into the canopy to be broken down and sold. The salt dust has chemically bleached the wood here, preserving it in a ghostly white fossilization. Historians still argue about the acoustics of this market. We know the communication tubes were silent, but was the market loud? Some economic anthropologists suggest the silent barter theory. Given that the entire city is a giant acoustic chamber where sound carries, shouting, "I'll give you 5 ounces for that goat," would have been deafening and annoying for everyone living upstairs. Did they develop a sign language for trade? Or did they whisper? Imagine a bazaar of 1,000 people conducting millions of dollars in trade in absolute library silence. It's an eerie thought. You move deeper into the sector. The stalls get larger. You see remnants of large clay jars. This was the kola nut section. The kola nut contains caffeine and was chewed as a stimulant and appetite suppressant. It was the coffee of the ancient world. You can imagine the tired architects coming down here for a mid-morning pick-me-up, chewing a nut to power through another shift of bending ironwood trees. But amidst the glitter of the gold floor and the white ghost of the salt stalls, you notice something alarming. You stop at a massive support pillar near the center of the market. The gold dust on the floor around it is disturbed. It's piled up in little drifts mixed with something that looks like sawdust. You shine your light up the pillar. It's not smooth like the others. It's riddled with small holes. Thousands of them. The wood looks spongy. You poke it with your trekking pole, and a chunk of the pillar the size of a brick crumbles away, turning to dust before it hits the floor. The Green Horizon had an enemy. An enemy that didn't care about gold or salt or history. An enemy that only wanted to eat. You are looking at the evidence of the termite wars. Gold is eternal. It doesn't rust, it doesn't rot. But the bank is made of wood. And in the rainforest, wood is on the menu. You have just found the reason why this civilization might have started to panic. The foundation wasn't failing because of bad engineering. It was failing because it was delicious. You signaled the guide. He looks at the crumbled wood and grimaces. He knows what that means. We need to move. We need to see the extent of the damage. We are leaving the glitter of the economy and heading into the forensic scene of a biological siege. You step closer to the crumbled pillar, careful not to lean on it. The gold dust floor around your boots is mixed with a fine sawdust-like powder. This is Frastermite waste. You are standing at ground zero of the termite wars, a silent, centuries-long conflict that makes the 100 Years' War look like a minor disagreement. In a city built of stone, time is the enemy. In a city built of wood, hunger is the enemy. You shine your light up the length of the column. It is scarred with what look like veins of gray concrete running through the dark wood. These are fossilized mud tubes. Subterranean termites are soft-bodied and dry out easily. So they build these tunnels out of soil and saliva to travel from the ground to their food source without ever being exposed to the air. They are the siege ramps of the insect world. But looking at the scale of the damage here, you realize the architects weren't just dealing with your average garden pest. They were likely battling Macrotermes bellicosus, the African mound-building termite. These things are the heavy artillery of the insect kingdom. They don't just eat wood, they strip mine it. They cultivate fungal gardens inside their nests that break down cellulose, allowing them to digest massive hardwood trees that other insects can't touch. You can see the countermeasures the architects deployed. They were desperate. You spot a section of the wall where the wood has been gouged out and replaced with a dark, glassy substance. You touch it, it's hard as rock. When a breach was detected, when the scouts heard the telltale clicking of jaws inside the wall, the termite guard would drill into the chamber and pump it full of toxic, boiling sap from the Copephaera tree. It was chemical warfare. They were literally embalming the enemy alive inside the walls. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. Termites are responsible for the destruction of more human history in the tropics than fire or floods combined. Wooden artifacts from West Africa are rare, not because they weren't made, but because they were eaten. The fact that this structure is still standing suggests a level of vigilance that borders on paranoia. But chemical warfare wasn't their only weapon. You notice a series of small, rhythmic indentations carved into the healthy wood surrounding the damaged area. They look like the dimples on a golf ball. This supports the sonic defense theory. We know that termites communicate by banging their heads against the walls of their tunnels, a phenomenon called drumming. It warns the colony of danger. Some bioactistic historians believe the architects developed a system of percussive devices, perhaps wind-driven beaters or water hammers powered by the hydraulic system that constantly hammered the foundations at a specific frequency. This artificial drumming would jam the termites' communication network, keeping them in a perpetual state of high alert and preventing them from organizing an effective feeding frenzy. It was acoustic jamming. You walk past a section of the floor that has been ripped up. Underneath, instead of soil, you see a layer of charcoal and ash, a foot thick. This is the ash moat. Termites hate ash. The abrasive particles scratch their exoskeletons, causing them to dehydrate and die. The builders seemingly laid a foundation of burnt timber, likely the remains of the forest they cleared to build the pyramid to create a scorched earth barrier beneath the city. It's a nice poetic touch, the dead trees protecting the living ones. But the most chilling piece of evidence is a war trophy embedded in the wall near the exit of the merchant sector. It is a slab of clear, hardened resin, similar to the archives. But inside, there is no gold weight, no royal decree. There is a chunk of a termite queen. She is massive, pulsatingly huge compared to the tiny workers around her hand, frozen in the moment of her death. The fact that they dug deep enough to find the queen, dragged her out, and encased her in amber suggests a deep, visceral hatred. This wasn't just pest control, it was a message. We found her, we killed her. Stay out. There is a quirky, gross detail about how they might have detected the infestations. Local oral traditions speak of the earmen, a guild of blind citizens who were trained from birth to listen to the walls. They would press their ears against the timber in the dead of night, listening for the microscopic tearing sound of wood fibers being sheared. They were living stethoscopes, diagnosing the cancer in the building's bones. As you look at the crumbled pillar, you realize that despite all these countermeasures, the poison, the ash, the sonic jamming, the termites eventually won this battle. The sheer amount of frass on the floor indicates that at some point the maintenance stopped. The earmen stopped listening. The resin pumps ran dry. And once the humans stopped fighting back, The jungle remembered that this pyramid was just a really big dead tree waiting to happen. But why did they stop? This civilization was advanced, organized, and vigilant. You don't just forget to check for termites. You stop checking because you have bigger problems. You feel a change in the air as you move away from the infested zone. The humidity drops. The air feels drier, dusty. You are walking into a section of the pyramid that shows signs of a different kind of stress. The wood here isn't eaten. It's cracked. It's shrunken. The termites were a constant, manageable threat as long as the tree was healthy and producing sap. But a tree only produces sap if it has water. And if the water stops, the walls stop healing. You are about to enter the drought of silence. You are leaving the battlefield of the bugs and entering the geological record of a catastrophe that dried the blood of the city. You leave the crumbled, termite-infested ruins of the merchant sector and descend further, following the natural grain of the structure. But the deeper you go, the stranger the atmosphere becomes. You've spent the last hour sweating in the humid, greenhouse-like conditions of the upper levels, surrounded by the smell of wet earth and growing things. But here, the air is dry, bone dry. It sucks the moisture right out of your eyes. You run your hand along the wall. It feels rough, like sandpaper. The wood here isn't smooth and living. It's checked, split by thousands of microscopic fissures. It looks less like a tree and more like driftwood found on a beach. You have walked into the drought of silence. This layer of the pyramid tells the story of a catastrophe that didn't involve an enemy army or a swarm of bugs. It involved the sky simply turning off the tap. You are looking at the architectural scar tissue of a mega drought. The first thing you notice is the silence. Remember that low-frequency thrum we heard earlier? The pulse of the hydraulic system moving water through the roots down here, in this specific historical stratum, that sound would have stopped. When the water table dropped, the trees couldn't generate the transpiration pull to lift the water. The plumbing died. The air conditioning died. The vertical farms on the exterior would have turned brown and crispy within weeks. Imagine the psychological impact of that. You live in a building that is alive, a building that usually hums with the sound of moving water. And then, one day, the hum stops. The silence would have been deafening. It was the sound of the city dying of thirst. You shine your light on a cross-section of a support beam that has sheared off, likely due to stress. You can see the growth rings clearly. You see wide, healthy, honey-colored bands representing years of plenty. And then, abruptly, the bands tighten. They become dark, thin lines, stacked on top of each other so closely they look like a solid black bruise. These are the black bands. Here is a mainstream historical fact to anchor this. Paleoclimatologists analyzing sediment cores from Lake Bosamtwi in Ghana have confirmed that West Africa experienced several severe centuries-long droughts between 1400 and 1750 AD. These climatic shifts destabilized empires, shifted trade routes, and caused famines that reshaped the demographic map of the continent. The Green Horizon wasn't immune. In fact, because it was a biological machine, it was more vulnerable than a stone city. A stone wall doesn't shrink when it gets thirsty. A wood wall does. That brings us to the structural nightmare you are standing in. As the massive timbers dried out, they lost volume. They shrank. But they didn't all shrink at the same rate. The tension knots in the weaver's hall would have tightened to the snapping point. The floors would have warped. The seamless joints would have pulled apart, creating gaps that let in light, wind, and crucially enemies. You step over a fissure in the floor that is wide enough to swallow your foot. This wasn't earthquake damage. This was the building dehydrating. You can imagine the inhabitants frantically trying to caulk these gaps with clay or resin, trying to keep their fortress from literally unraveling at the seams. There is a quirky, desperate detail found in the alcoves of this dry zone. You spot a series of large, porous stones hollowed out like bowls. These are drip stones. When the main plumbing failed, the citizens had to improvise. They likely placed these stones under the few remaining active root drips, or hung them out of the ventilation shafts to catch the morning dew. The water would soak into the porous rock and then slowly drip into a collection jar. It implies a level of rationing that is terrifying to contemplate. You aren't turning on a tap. You are waiting for a rock to sweat. Historians still argue whether this drought triggered a water war within the pyramid itself. Did the people in the lower levels closer to the last remaining dregs of the groundwater cut off the supply to the upper canopy? Some evidence suggests that the internal staircases were barricaded during this period. The inverted status we talked about earlier might have flipped again. Suddenly, being at the bottom near the mud was the only place you wanted to be. The penthouse became a death trap. You continue walking through the desiccated hallway. The wood is so dry, it feels like tinder. If you held a match to this wall, it wouldn't just burn, it would explode. And that's a terrifying thought. The architects spent centuries keeping this wood wet, green, and fire-resistant. But the drought stripped away that protection. It turned the greatest fortress in the jungle into the world's largest stack of firewood. You spot something scratched into the dry wood of a wall graffiti. But it's not the intricate, careful carving of the archives. It's jagged, frantic. It looks like a tally. Hundreds of marks, days without rain, deaths, or maybe a countdown to when they would abandon the structure. There is a fringe theory that the Rangcallers, the spiritual leaders responsible for weather rituals, were the first to be purged during this crisis. When the prayers failed and the sky remained blue and pitiless for a decade, the populace might have turned on the priesthood. Some cryptarchaeologists interpret the smashed remains of ceremonial drums found in this sector as evidence of a religious coup. If the gods won't send water, we don't need the drummers. You pause at a junction. To your left, the tunnel descends into the deep roots where the water once was. To your right, it heads toward the outer perimeter. You choose the perimeter. As you get closer to the outer wall, you realize the defensive capability of the pyramid was also compromised. Remember those weaponized ant-filled thorns? Acacia trees need water to produce the nectar that feeds the ants. No water, no nectar. No nectar, no ants. The living fortifications would have withered into dead, brittle brambles. The standing army of millions of stinging insects would have deserted or starved. The green horizon was naked. You reach a breach in the outer wall. Sunlight streams in, harsh and bright. Through the gap, you can see the forest outside. But looking at the edges of this breach, you notice something. The wood here isn't just dry. It's black. It's wask. You touch it, and your finger comes away covered in soot. The drought didn't kill the city. It just weakened it. It dried the wood, killed the defenses, and cracked the walls. It prepared the table. But it was what came after the drought that actually cleared the plates. You are stepping out of the drought of silence and into the fire raids, because when your fortress is made of dry timber and your enemy knows you are thirsty, they don't bring battering rams, they bring torches. You step through the breach in the outer wall, expecting to find the clean, weathered gray of dead timber. Instead, you find a nightmare in monochrome. The walls here are black knot, the rich, dark brown of old mahogany, but the absolute, light-absorbing black of pure carbon. You run your hand over a support beam, and the surface crumbles into a fine, greasy powder that stains your fingers instantly. The texture is unmistakable. It's the cracked, alligatorskin pattern of wood that has been subjected to intense, unchecked heat. You have entered the kill zone of the fire raids. If the drought was the slow strangulation of the city, this was the knife to the throat. You can read the history of the siege in the scorch marks. This wasn't a wild forest fire that got out of control. Forest fires move quickly. They singe the bark and move on. This fire was sustained. It was fed. You look at the floor. It's covered in a layer of solidified sludge, mix of ash, soil, and something resinous. This is the forensic evidence of the accelerant. Historians believe that the attacking force, likely a rival state from the Savannah Belt, perhaps the Soso or a splinter group of the early Mali Empire, knew exactly how to kill the Green Horizon. They knew they couldn't hack through the walls, so they waited for the dry season. Or perhaps they waited for the great drought you just walked through. Then, they brought the liquid fire. This substance was likely a mixture of palm oil, shea butter, and pitch, possibly thickened with animal fat. It would have been sticky, napalm-like. They didn't just shoot flaming arrows. They lobbed clay pots filled with this sludge against the base of the pyramid. When the pots shattered, the oil soaked into the dry, thirsty roots. Then, one spark was all it took. The result would have been catastrophic. You were standing in what was likely a chimney sector. Remember those brilliant ventilation shafts designed to cool the city? During a fire, they turned into death traps. The draft that usually pulled cool air in would have sucked the smoke and flames upward with terrifying velocity. The pyramid became a blast furnace. You walk deeper into the charred hallway. The destruction here is total. The intricate woven floors are gone, burned away, leaving you to walk on the calcified skeleton of the main branches. But amidst the ruin, you see evidence of a desperate, heroic defense. You spot a section where a massive limb has been hacked, through not burned, but cut. The cut marks are jagged, frantic. This brings us to the amputation protocols. When the fire started spreading up the vascular system, the inhabitants had to make a brutal choice. They couldn't put the fire out, water was scarce, remember, so they had to cut the limb off. They had to sacrifice entire neighborhoods to save the trunk. Local legends speak of the axe martyrs. These were teams of engineers who volunteered to stay behind in the burning sectors. Their job was to hack through the massive structural connections, the bridges, the walkways, the lateral branches that connected the burning zone to the rest of the city. They were literally amputating parts of their own home while standing on them. You can imagine the scene, the heat, the smoke, the sound of axes biting into the wood, and then the sickening crack as the burning wing of the pyramid fell away into the jungle below, taking the engineers with it. It's a grim reminder that engineering isn't always about building. Sometimes it's about controlled destruction. You look up, the ceiling here is stained with a thick, glossy residue. This is creosote distilled wood tar that condenses from smoke. It covers everything. It implies that the smoke was thick enough to suffocate anyone in the upper levels long before the flames reached them. The cool breath system we admired earlier would have delivered carbon monoxide directly to the bedrooms of the elite. The architecture that allowed them to thrive became the mechanism of their extinction. But the enemy didn't just rely on physics, they brought chemistry. You find a shard of a clay vessel embedded in a melted wall. It smells faint, but distinct sulfur, or perhaps rotting peppers. Here is a mainstream historical fact. The use of toxic smoke in West African warfare is well documented. Armies would burn mixtures of dried chili peppers, animal dung, and toxic plants to create a noxious cloud that would drive defenders out of caves or fortifications. It was tear gas, 12th century style. If the attackers pumped this smoke into the intake vents at the base of the pyramid, they could have cleared the entire structure without ever stepping inside. Historians still argue about the identity of the attackers. The scorched architecture doesn't leave a calling card. Were they the Almoravids coming down from the desert? Or were they a forgotten sea people of the Jungla nomadic confederation that viewed these static, arrogant tree cities as an affront to the natural order? Some fringe theories even suggest it was a civil war that the fire started from the inside, a rebellion of the lower classes trying to smoke out the rulers in the canopy. Burn the tree to kill the monkey, as the proverb goes. You stumble over something on the ground. It's a pile of stones, round, smooth, river stones. These aren't building materials, these are munitions. This was a drop zone. The defenders in the canopy would have rained these stones down on the attackers below. But looking at the pile, unspent and blackened by soot, you realize the tragic truth. They couldn't see the targets. The smoke blinded them. The perfect defensive height of the pyramid made them helpless once the cloud layer formed below them. They were throwing rocks at ghosts while they choked. There is a quirky, macabre detail in the way the wood has scarred over in certain spots. You see strange, bulbous growths on the blackened timber areas where the tree tried to heal the burn wound after the fire went out. This means the tree didn't die immediately. The pyramid survived the fire. It was maimed, scarred, and amputated. But the core taproot was deep enough and the heartwood wet enough that the organism lived on. It tried to cover its burns with bark. It tried to keep growing. This leads us to the most heartbreaking phase of the city's history. The fire raids failed to destroy the green horizon completely. The enemy retreated, or perhaps the rains finally came. The survivors crawled out of the smoke-filled vents, looked at their blackened, crippled home, and decided they weren't leaving. They were going to fix it. But you can't fix a charcoal wall. You can't weave ash. You are moving from the scene of the crime to the scene of the surgery. You are heading to the great grafting. The architects, faced with a dying, burned-out shell, attempted one final, impossible feat of bioengineering to save their civilization. They tried to perform a skin graft on a mountain. As you wipe the soot from your face and step carefully over the charred remains of a bridge, you feel a profound sense of respect. Most people would have packed up and moved to a cave. These people picked up their tools and tried to glue the forest back together. You leave the blackened, soot-choked corridors of the fire zone and step into a section of the pyramid that feels wrong. Up until now, the architecture of the Green Horizon has been elegant. Even in its ruin, the original structure had a flow, a natural logic where every curve and knot felt intentional. But here, the The walls look like a panic attack frozen in wood. You are looking at a chaotic, lumpy, desperate attempt to hold the sky up. You have entered the era of the great grafting. This is the architectural equivalent of triage. After the fire raids and the droughts, the pyramid was structurally compromised. The massive load-bearing columns were charred and shrinking. The roof was threatening to come down. The architects didn't have 50 years to grow new support beams. They needed a fix, and they needed it yesterday. So, they broke their own rules. They stopped being artists and became field surgeons. You walk up to a massive support pillar. The core is the old, black, fire-hardened ironwood we saw earlier, but it is wrapped in a pale, chaotic mesh of completely different wood. It looks like a splint. The architects realized they couldn't regrow the slow-moving hardwoods, so they brought in the weeds. They likely used species like Musanga cecropioids, the umbrella tree, or aggressive varieties of ficus. These are pioneer species trees that grow explosively fast, colonizing clearings in months rather than decades. They grow fast, but they are soft, they are weak. The strategy was to plant these fast growers at the base of the damaged columns, guide them up the charred trunks, and induce them to fuse with the dead wood, essentially creating a living exoskeleton to hold the corpse of the building upright. It's Frankenstein architecture. They were stitching living flesh onto dead bone. You can see the violence of the process. You spot a series of massive, rusted iron spikes driven through the pale outer wood and deep into the black core. This wasn't the gentle inosculation of the Golden Age, where trees were coaxed to kiss until they merged. This was stapling. They hammered the new wood into the old, forcing a connection that nature never intended. You can almost feel the trauma in the grain. Here is a mainstream historical fact to anchor this. Grafting is an ancient agricultural practice used by the Chinese and Romans to clone fruit trees. But standard grafting requires compatibility. You graft an apple branch onto an apple rootstock. If you try to graft an apple onto an oak, it fails. The vascular systems don't line up. The sap doesn't flow. This is known as graft incompatibility. And looking at the wall in front of you, you can see exactly that happening. The pale outer wood is peeling away from the black core. The graft didn't take. The fast-growing softwoods swelled with water during the wet season, while the dead hardwood core remained rigid. The differential movement tore the staples out. The bandage has fallen off the wound. It's a tragic sight. It represents the realization that their technology, their mastery of nature, had a limit. You can guide nature, you can shape it, but you can't force it to resurrect the dead. You notice a peculiar texture on the surface of the graft. It looks like fabric. You scrape away a bit of moss and find a layer of woven hemp or cotton soaked in a dark, sticky substance. These were the resin casts, just like a doctor wraps a broken arm in plaster. The architects wrapped these failing joints in resin-soaked cloth to try and bind the two disparate woods together. The cloth has rot-proofed the wood beneath it, preserving the evidence of their desperation. It's a literal band-aid on a skyscraper. There is a fringe theory that gets a bit dark here. Some archaeobotanists suggest that the great grafting wasn't just structural, it was sacrificial. The theory posits that the specific nutrient paste used to bind the grafts contained blood animal, or perhaps human. The logic follows the law of contagion common in many ancient magical systems. Life pays for life. If the tree is dying, feed it lifeblood to wake it up. While we haven't found a smoking gun or a smoking altar, the sheer frantic energy of this sector makes you wonder what lengths they went to in order to save their home. You step through a doorway that has been narrowed by these added layers of reinforcement. The room beyond is claustrophobic. The original spaciousness of the pyramid is gone, choked by these added struts and braces. It feels like the building is wearing a corset that is too tight. But amidst the failure, there is a quirky success story. You spot a section of the wall where the graft actually worked, but not in the way they intended. The original column has completely rotted away, leaving a hollow space, but the bandage of strangler fig roots that was wrapped around it has thickened enough to become a freestanding tube. The cast became the bone. It's a perfect visual metaphor for the ship of Theseus. If you replace every part of the pyramid with a graft, is it still the same pyramid? Or is it just a hollow ghost of the original? You hear a creak, a loud one. You freeze. It comes from above. You look up, one of the stapled beams is sagging. The iron spikes are rusted through. The soft, fast-growing wood has turned punky and brittle with age. The repair job has expired. The great grafting bought them time, maybe a generation, maybe two. It allowed the elders to die in their beds and the children to grow up. But it wasn't a permanent fix. The architects must have known it. They were smart people. They knew that soft would rot. They knew the staples would rust. They weren't building for the future anymore. They were building for the exit. You can sense the shift in the psychology of the architecture. The early levels were built with arrogance. We will be here forever. This level was built with fear. Just hold together a little longer. You follow the path of the failed grafts. They seem to lead away from the residential areas and the central hubs, funneling traffic toward the deep hidden recesses of the root system. The repairs weren't just about keeping the roof up. They were about keeping the escape routes open. You are about to discover the final secret of the green horizon. When the grafts started to peel and the water didn't come back, the civilization didn't just sit there and wait for the roof to fall on their heads. They initiated the evacuation protocol. You are heading down again, past the rot and the rust, into the secret. Slide-like tunnels that were designed for one thing, getting thousands of people out of the sky and into the earth in a hurry. You leave the sad, crumbling architecture of the great grafting behind and head downward, following the undeniable pull of gravity. The air gets heavier again, losing the dry, dusty scent of the fire zone and taking on the dank, earthy smell of the subterranean. But you aren't heading back to the hydraulic pumps or the bioluminescent archives. You are looking for the back door. Every fortress has one: the postern gate, the sally port, the tunnel that the king uses while the peasants are holding the front door. But in a city built hundreds of feet in the air, a back door isn't just a door, it's a drop. You find yourself in a section of the lower trunk that feels surprisingly unfinished. The walls are rough, lacking the intricate carvings of the upper levels. This was a utility zone, hidden behind false panels of bark. You pry open a rotted section of a buttress root, expecting to find another storage closet. Instead, you find a void. You shine your light into the darkness. It's a tube, a massive hollowed-out cylinder plunging into the earth at a steep 4 to 5 degree angle. It curves away, out of sight, disappearing into the bedrock beneath the tree. You are staring at the evacuation protocol. The architects realized that in the event of a total collapse fire, termite structural failure or invasion staircases are death traps. They are slow, they bottleneck, and they cause trampled bodies. If you need to evacuate 5,000 people from a vertical city in 10 minutes, you don't use steps, you use a slide. You lean in and run your hand along the bottom of the tube. It is incredibly smooth. The wood has been sanded, polished, and coated in layer after layer of hard lacquer. It feels like the surface of a bowling lane. This is the frictionless chute. You can visualize the scene. The alarm sounds, perhaps the drumming of the sonic defense system, changes to a specific, frantic tempo. The citizens rush to these concealed access points. They sit, clutch their children and their most precious portable heirlooms to their chests, and push off. They would have hurtled down through the dark heart of the tree, bypassing the burning levels, the fighting, and the chaos. Spitting out safely into the caverns deep underground, it is a mass transit system powered entirely by fear and gravity. Here is a mainstream historical fact. The use of subterranean escape tunnels is well documented in West African military history. The Ashanti capital of Kumasi was rumored to have secret tunnels connecting the royal palace to the surrounding forest, allowing the Asanahin to move unseen. The caves of the Bandiagara escarpment in Mali were used by the Dogon people to hide from slave raiders. The concept of going under to get out is a survival strategy as old as warfare itself. But there is a quirky, practical detail here that speaks to the engineering challenges of a giant wooden slide. Just to the left of the chute entrance, you find a large stone basin. Inside, there is a solidified residue of something yellowish and waxy, palm oil. Before you jumped, you greased yourself. Or perhaps there was an attendant stationed here at the slide master who would slather the chute with oil during the evacuation. Without it, the friction of Wodonskin at those speeds would have caused severe burns. UD survived the fire upstairs only to lose the skin on the back of your legs on the way down. It's a visceral, gruesome detail that grounds this fantasy in the laws of physics. You spot something lying on the floor near the basin. It's a pile of objects. You sift through them. Heavy clay pots, a large ornate brass stool, a stone grinding wheel. These are the rejects, the things that were too heavy. You can imagine the frantic arguments here at the precipice. You can't take the grinding wheel, AMA. Leave it. But it was my grandmother's. Leave it or die. This pile of abandoned domestic treasures is the saddest thing you've seen yet. It represents the exact moment when the civilization accepted that they were refugees. They stripped their lives down to what they could carry in their hands and what they could carry in their hearts. Everything else was left here at the top of the slide as an offering to the silence. There's a fringe theory that these chutes weren't just for people. Some cryptozoologists suggest the Ark hypothesis. They believe the Green Horizon housed a genetic repository of rare animals, not just livestock, but sacred forest creatures. The theory goes that there were specific, larger chutes designed to evacuate the living library of the jungle. Imagine sliding down a dark tunnel next to a sedated leopard and a crate of parrots. It's Noah's Ark meets a water park. You check your gear, you obviously can't slide down, you don't know if the bottom is clear or if it ends in a pit of spikes. Paranoia is a survival trait. But you see a series of iron rungs driven into the side of the tuba maintenance ladder. You start to climb down. The air in the chute is stagnant. It smells of old oil and adrenaline. As you descend, the sounds of the upper pyramid, the wind, the creaking branches fade away. You are entering the earth. The descent is long. You count the rungs, 50, 100, 200. You are passing through the root ball and into the geological foundation. Finally, your boots hit solid ground. You are in a cavern. You shine your light around. The wooden tube ends here, flaring out like the bell of a trumpet, to deposit its riders gently onto a floor covered in soft sand. A sand landing smart, but the cavern is empty. There are no skeletons, no signs of a massacre. This means the evacuation worked. They got out. You see a tunnel leading away from the landing zone, carved into the natural limestone. It heads north, away from the pyramid, away from the river. It heads deeper into the interior. You follow it for 100 yards until you reach a point where the ceiling has collapsed. A massive slab of rock blocks the way. But looking closely at the rubble, you see it wasn't a natural collapse. The keystones were pulled. They collapsed the tunnel behind them. This wasn't just an escape, it was a disappearance. They slid down the tree, ran into the dark, and then pulled the mountain down over their tracks. They wanted to ensure that whoever or whatever burned their city couldn't follow them. You touch the cold rock of the deadfall. Somewhere on the other side of this pile of stone, the descendants of the Green Horizon might still be out there. Maybe they integrated into other tribes. Maybe they founded a new city, one made of stone this time, having learned the hard lesson of wood. Or maybe, just maybe, they found another deep forest, another giant tree, and started weaving again. But for the pyramid above you, the story ended here. The people left. The blood stopped pumping. The noise stopped. And when the people leave, the rot begins. You turn back toward the wooden chute. You have to climb back up. You need to see the final stage of the life cycle. You've seen the birth, the life, the war, and the flight. Now you have to witness the corpse. You are climbing back up to the surface to see the rot sets in, because nature doesn't mourn. It recycles. You climb back up the rusted iron rungs of the maintenance ladder, hauling yourself out of the evacuation chute and back into the humid embrace of the pyramid's interior. But something has changed. The air doesn't smell like resin or wood smoke anymore. It smells sweet, cloying, and heavy. It smells like wet cardboard and mushrooms. You have walked through the birth, the life, and the death of the city. Now, you are walking through its digestion. You step into a hallway that was once likely a bustling thoroughfare. Now, it is a swamp. The roof has partially collapsed, letting in the rain, and the floor is a treacherous slush of decomposing timber. You take a step, and your boot sinks 6 inches into the wood. It's soft, spongy, and giving off heat. This is the rot. In a stone city, ruins can stand for thousands of years. The Parthenon loses a few marble chips, but it stays standing. In a biocity, abandonment is a death sentence. As soon as the resin scribes stopped patching the leaks and the leaf tenders stopped pruning the canopy, the jungle looked at this massive pile of organized cellulose and said, "Lunch." You shine your light on the wall. It's moving. Not with termites this time, but with a carpet of white mycelium. It looks like frost, covering every inch of the surface. You are witnessing the rapid recycling of history. Here is a mainstream historical fact. In the tropical rainforest, the decomposition rate is terrifyingly fast. High temperatures and high humidity create a hyperactive bacterial environment. A fallen log that would last 50 years in a Canadian forest will be dirt in 5 years. Here, The green horizon wasn't just built in the ecosystem. It is being consumed by it. The nitrogen and carbon locked in these massive trunks are being unlocked and fed back into the soil to fuel the next generation of trees. You pass a room where the floor has fallen through completely, revealing the level below. It's a cascading collapse. When one structural member rots, it brings down everything attached to it. The tension that held the weavers' hall together has snapped, leaving the building to slump into a chaotic pile of debris. But amidst the decay, there is a strange, vibrant beauty. You see a sapling, a young mahogany tree growing directly out of the rotted stump of a support column. This brings us to the nurse log phenomenon. In ecology, a fallen tree becomes a nursery for new life, providing nutrients, water, and elevation for seedlings. The green horizon has become the world's largest nurse log. The death of the architecture is the birth of the forest. The city isn't disappearing, it's reincarnating. There is a quirky, slightly disgusting detail hanging from the ceiling. You see massive gelatinous sacs that look like alien eggs. These are slime molds. They are throbbing slowly. They aren't plants, they aren't animals, and they aren't fungi. They are protists, single-celled organisms that congregate to form a moving, feeding mass. They are sliding over the intricate carvings of the architects, dissolving the history and leaving behind nothing but slime. It's a humbling reminder that nature doesn't care about art, it only cares about calories. Historians still argue about the speed of this decay. Some anomalies suggest it happened too fast. This leads to the self-destruct theory. Did the architects, upon initiating the evacuation protocol, deliberately inoculate the structure with aggressive rodent-desiccating agents? Did they release a biological kill switch to ensure that their fortress could not be used by the enemy who burned it? It's a scorched earth policy, but instead of fire, they used mold. If we can't live here, no one can. You gingerly step over a pile of what looks like mud, but is actually the liquefied remains of a furniture set. You realized that in another 100 years, there won't be a pyramid here at all. There will just be a strangely shaped hill. This explains the Green Horizon legend. The early explorers didn't find cities because the cities had already melted. They walked right over them, thinking they were stepping on mulch, not realizing they were stepping on the roof of a library. You reach a section where the outer wall has completely dissolved, leaving a gaping hole the size of a bus. Through it, you can see the modern jungle. It looks aggressive, chaotic, and very much alive. The contrast is stark. Inside, the ordered world of the humans is dying. Outside, the chaotic world of nature is thriving. You signal your guide. It's time to go. The air in here is thick with spores, you probably inhaling a lungful of history with every breath. And that can't be healthy. You need to get back to the surface, to the fresh air, and look at this thing from the outside one last time. You are about to exit the rot and step into the modern camouflage. You're going to see why satellites miss this, why LiDAR struggles, and why the best place to hide a treehouse is in a forest. You stumble out of the rotting breach in the pyramid's flank, gasping for air that doesn't taste like ancient mold. You slide down a muddy embankment, grab onto a vine to steady yourself, and finally come to a stop on a ridge about 100 yards away from the structure. You wipe the sweat and grime from your eyes, turn around, and look back at what you just explored, and your brain immediately rejects it. From this distance, the green horizon is gone. The massive engineered pyramid you just spent hours crawling through the hydraulic pumps, the archives, the vertical farms, has vanished. In its place is just ... a hill, a steep, densely forested hill, indistinguishable from the dozen other hills rolling away into the distance. You are looking at the modern camouflage, and you are realizing exactly why this civilization remained a myth for so long. We live in the age of the satellite. We assume that because we have photographed every square inch of the Earth from space, we know everything that's down here. We scroll through Google Earth, zooming in on our neighbor's backyard pool, and think nothing can hide from the all-seeing eye. But the architects of Ghana defeated the satellite 500 years before the rocket was even invented. They didn't hide their city under the canopy. They made their city out of the canopy. Here is a mainstream historical fact that explains this blindness. In recent years, LiDAR light detection and ranging technology has revolutionized archaeology, stripping away the vegetation digitally to reveal massive Mayan cities in Guatemala and extensive earthworks in the Amazon. Why did we miss them for decades? Because from the air, A temple covered in trees looks exactly like a hill covered in trees. Optical satellites see green. They don't see structure unless the structure contrasts with the background. But the green horizon takes this a step further. Stone temples eventually show up on thermal imaging because stone absorbs heat during the day and radiates it at night. It creates a thermal signature, but this pyramid is alive. It transpires, it sweats. Its internal temperature is regulated by that massive evaporation system we saw inside. To a thermal camera, this massive city looks exactly the same temperature as the forest around it. It is a thermal ghost. It doesn't glow hot, it stays cool. The architects inadvertently built the ultimate stealth bomber. You squint at the slope. Even knowing the vertical farms are there, you can't see the terraces. The fractal geometry breaks up the straight lines. This brings us to the quirky genius of the fractal defense. Humans love straight lines. Nature loves chaos. If you build a straight wall, it stands out. But the architects seemingly understood that if you break the line every 10 feet with a jutting branch, a cluster of leaves, or a twisting root, you disrupt the visual pattern. They mimicked the chaotic mathematics of the forest. They didn't build a smooth pyramid. They built a jagged, noisy one. There is a funny, slightly embarrassing anecdote from the 1970s that local guides tell. A British survey expedition reportedly camped on the lower slopes of this very hill for 3 days. They complained about the uneven ground and the weirdly hard soil. They were literally sleeping on the roof of the merchant sector, drove their tent pegs into the ancient ceiling beams, and left without ever realizing they were camping on a skyscraper. It's the ultimate can't see the forest for the trees moment. You pull out your own phone, which definitely has no signal, and look at the offline map. It shows you standing in the middle of a blank green void. No landmarks, no ruins, just forest reserve. This invisibility protected them from more than just satellites. It protected them from the colonial powers. When the British and the French were carving up West Africa, looking for stone forts and gold mines, they marched right past these overgrown hills. They were looking for the architecture of Rome or London. They weren't programmed to recognize the architecture of the jungle. Historians still argue about whether this camouflage was the primary goal or just a happy accident of their building material. Did they actively prune the canopy to look random? Some researchers point to the crown shyness phenomena where trees, naturally, leave gaps between their branches and suggest the architects manipulated this to break up the shadow patterns, ensuring no hard edges were visible from the high ridgelines where enemy scouts might stand. There is a fringe theory that suggests the camouflage went beyond the visual. The biostatic theory. Some cryptobotanists claim that the sheer density of the specific iron-rich hardwoods and the massive volume of rushing water in the internal plumbing created a localized electromagnetic dampening field. In simple terms, compasses act weird here. Radios get static. It's the Bermuda Triangle of the rainforest. Did they accidentally build a Faraday cage out of trees? Probably not. But if you try to fly a drone over this thing, don't be surprised if it loses connection and crashes into the apiary. You look at the hill one last time. It's humbling. We think of advanced civilizations as ones that conquer nature, paving it, damming it, cutting it down. But the green horizon suggests a different path. They advanced into nature. They merged with it so completely that 500 years later, we can't tell where the building ends and the biology begins. But there is one problem with a living building. One massive scientific headache that makes studying this place a nightmare. If you find a stone temple, you can carbon date the charcoal in the fire pit. You can date the pottery. But how do you date a building that is constantly growing new layers? How do you tell the age of a wall when the wall is biologically younger than the foundation? You turn to your guide, who is checking his watch, clearly ready to get back to civilization, but you have one last intellectual knot to untie. You need to understand the carbon puzzle. You're about to dive into the scientific argument that keeps archaeologists up at night. When a city regenerates its own cells, does it ever really get old? You stand on that ridge, staring at the hill that is actually a fortress, and you realize that while the camouflage is annoying for explorers, it is an absolute nightmare for scientists. You are looking at the carbon puzzle. In a normal archaeological dig, you find a wooden beam, you take a sample, and you send it to a lab for radiocarbon dating. The lab measures the decay of carbon-14 isotopes and tells you, this tree stopped breathing in the year 1150 AD. Boom, you have a date. You know when the roof was built, But the green horizon breaks the rules. The architects didn't cut the trees down to build the roof, they kept them alive. A living tree is constantly exchanging carbon with the atmosphere. It is constantly refreshing its cells. If you take a sample from the outer wall of the pyramid, the lab results won't say 1150 AD, they will say yesterday. You are looking at a building that has been biologically updating its own passport for 1,000 years. This leads to a fierce debate in the academic community known as the ship of Theseus problem. If the building replaces all its cells every few decades, is it the same building? And more importantly, for the poor grad student trying to write their thesis, how do you put a time stamp on a verb? This isn't a noun, it's an event. It's a happening. Getty images, okay? You think? Forget carbon dating. Just count the rings. Dendrochronology is the gold standard, right? You count the rings on the stump, you know how old the tree is. Here is a mainstream historical fact that ruins that plan. Tropical trees are notoriously bad at keeping calendars. In Europe or North America, trees have a dormant winter season and a growing summer season, creating distinct dark and light rings. In the tropical rainforest near the equator, the growing season is ... always. It's wet and hot all year round. Many species here, like the ceiba, don't produce visible annual rings. Their wood is a continuous, homogeneous blur of growth. Trying to date a tropical tree by looking at its cross-section is like trying to tell time on a clock that has no hands. So, how do we know when this place was built? We have to cheat. We have to ignore the building and look at the trash. Historians and archaeologists have turned to inclusion dating. They don't date the wood. They date the dead things trapped inside the wood. Remember the fly and the resin. That fly died instantly. It stopped exchanging carbon the moment it got stuck. By dating the fly, we date the resin pore. By dating the charcoal found in the ash moat, we date the construction of the foundation. We are building a timeline out of the debris, not the structure itself. This brings us to a quirky, slightly gross alternative method, the termite clock. The fossilized termite mounds we saw in the ruins contain tiny bits of digested organic matter that are perfectly preserved in the cement-like structure of the mound. By dating the organic matter in the deepest, oldest termite tunnels, we can establish a minimum age for the infestation. If the termites moved in during the year 1300, the building had to be there before 1300. It's not precise, but it's better than asking the tree. There is a fringe theory that is currently gaining traction: genomic drift analysis. Some geneticists argue that because the architects selectively bred these trees for centuries, isolating them from the wild population, their DNA would have drifted significantly. By comparing the genome of the pyramid ceiba to the wild forest ceiba and calculating the rate of mutation, they claim they can estimate how long the two populations have been separated. It's a genetic clock. It suggests the project might have started far earlier than we. Think perhaps as early as the decline of the Ghanaian Empire in the 11th century. You look at the dense canopy one last time. It's blurring the line between biology and geology. In the West, we are obsessed with permanence. We build with granite and steel because we want our monuments to last forever, unchanged. But these people built with the assumption of change. They accepted that their home would grow, age, rot, and heal. They didn't build a monument to the past. They built a participant in the present. And that creates a final, beautiful irony. The green horizon is the only ancient ruin on Earth that gets younger as time goes on. The seeds dropped by the structural trees are sprouting right now, creating a new layer of canopy that is genetically linked to the original foundation. The city is still building itself, even if no one is home to enjoy it. You turn to your guide, the sun is setting again. The jungle is getting loud. The shadows are stretching out, turning the hill back into a mystery. You have seen the roots, the veins, the bones, and the skin of the beast. You have solved the riddle of how they lived, but you will never fully solve the riddle of when, and maybe that's okay. Some things belong to the always. You check your pack. You have your photos, which look like pictures of a forest, your notes, which sound insane, and a small, fallen piece of hardened resin you picked up off the ground. Don't tell customs. It's time to leave the canopy. It's time to head back to the world of air conditioning, square rooms, and dead wood. You are heading to leaving the canopy for the final walkout and the long journey home. You turn your back on the massive, silent hill that isn't really a hill, and you take the first step back toward the world you know. The hike out is always different from the hike in on the way in. You were driven by adrenaline, by the promise of discovery. You were looking for a lost civilization. On the way out, you are heavy with the knowledge of what you found. You are carrying the weight of a secret that feels too big for your backpack. The jungle seems to close in behind you as you descend the ridge. The path is slick with the evening dew, and the roots of the wild trees, the ones that were engineered by master architects, seem to catch at your boots, as if the forest is trying to keep you there. Stay, it seems to whisper. We have plenty of room in the archives. You look at your guide. He's moving faster now. The reverence he showed inside the perimeter has vanished, replaced by the practical urgency of a man who knows that when the sun goes down here, the mosquitoes come out in squadrons and the leopards wake up. He's not thinking about the great grafting or the termite wars. He's thinking about jollof rice and a cold beer. And honestly, after 6 hours of breathing, ancient spores and climbing vertical root ladders, so are you. But you can't help but feel a strange sense of loss. You are leaving a place that solved the problems we are still fighting. We are out here debating carbon footprints and sustainable housing, pouring concrete that cracks in 50 years while back there hidden in the leaves is the corpse of a city that grew its own walls, drank from the sky, and breathed with the wind. They figured it out, and then they vanished. This brings us to a final mainstream historical fact to carry home with you. Throughout Ghana and the broader West African coast, there exists a tradition of sacred groves or ensamanpo. These are patches of forest where hunting, farming, and logging are strictly forbidden because they are believed to be the dwelling places of ancestors or spirits. Ecologists have found that these groves are often reservoirs of immense biodiversity, containing rare species found nowhere else. It is highly probable that the green horizon survived for so long not just because of its camouflage, but because the local people wrapped it in a layer of spiritual do-not-touch tape. The taboos protected the technology long after the engineers were gone. You slip on a patch of wet clay, grabbing a fern to steady yourself. You are tired, your legs burn. The humidity is rising again, wrapping around you like a warm towel. There is a quirky local superstition that your guide mentioned earlier, and now you're taking it seriously. He told you that when you leave a place like this, a place of deep root, you should never walk in a straight line. Spirits travel in straight lines. If you walk in a zigzag pattern, you confuse them, and they can't follow you home. You find yourself subconsciously weaving between the trees. You tell yourself it's just to find better footing, but deep down, you know you just don't want a 1,000-year-old termite ghost following you back to your apartment. The sounds of the jungle shift as twilight deepens. The cicadas start their buzzsaw chorus. A hornbill honks in the distance, a lonely prehistoric sound. The forest is reasserting its dominance. The silence of the drought era and the roar of the fire raids are just memories now, buried under layers of humus and leaf litter. The forest doesn't hold grudges, it just holds ground. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of the silk cotton architects was truly lost, or if it was simply redistributed. There is a school of thought called the diaspora of design. It suggests that when the city was evacuated, the engineers didn't die out. They melted back into the rural villages. They stopped building skyscrapers because skyscrapers were dangerous targets, and instead applied their skills to smaller, subtler things, weaving complex baskets, carving intricate stools, and managing the agroforestry of cocoa and rubber. The theory goes that the genius didn't disappear, it just downsized. The green horizon wasn't the end of their story. It was just their biggest project before they went freelance. You finally see a break in the trees ahead, a hard, flat line of gray. The road, it looks alien. After hours of organic curves, fractal leaves, and woven floors, the sight of asphalt feels harsh and wrong. It's dead. It's a scar on the land, not a part of it. You step out of the tree line and onto the gravel shoulder. The air here is hotter, radiating off the road surface. Your Land Rover is parked where you left it, a boxy chunk of metal and rubber. It looks primitive compared to the hydraulic root pumps you just saw. You unlock the door, and the beep of the electronic lock sounds shrill and annoying. You throw your pack in the back seat, you sit in the driver's seat, and just breathe for a second. You look back at the wall of green. You can't see the pyramid anymore. You can't see the terraces. You can't see the slide. It's just trees. If you hadn't touched the resin yourself, you would think you hallucinated the whole thing. That's the beauty of the green horizon. It doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't need a plaque or a ticket booth. It is content to sit there, slowly digesting its own history, waiting for the next person crazy enough to hack their way in. You start the engine, the vibration feels coarse compared to the thrum of the water in the roots. You put the car in gear and pull away, the gravel crunching under your tires. As you drive, watching the jungle blur past your window, you realize that you aren't really leaving the mystery behind. You are taking a piece of it with you. You are taking the question, what else is in there? If they could hide a mountain-sized city in the trees, what else are we missing? What other histories are waiting in the silence, covered in moss, just waiting for us to learn how to look? You check the rearview mirror. The jungle is a solid dark wall now. The sun has set. The photosynthesis gates would be closing right about now, locking the darkness inside. The glowing fungi in the weaver's hall are waking up, casting their blue light on the empty corridors. The shrimp are swimming in the pipes. The city lives on, breathing in the dark, indifferent to whether we believe in it or not. You turn on your headlights, cutting a cone of artificial light into the night, and drive back toward the world of noise, concrete, and clocks. But you know you'll never look at a tree the same way again. You'll always wonder if, deep inside that trunk, there's a staircase leading up to a better way of living. The wind down, so there we are, safely back in the car, the jungle fading into the rearview mirror. The secrets of the green horizon tucked away in the back of your mind. It's been a long hike, hasn't it? We've climbed through the roots, squeezed through the thorns, and stood on the edge of the canopy looking out at a world that felt both ancient and futuristic. But now, it's time to let the humidity go. You can stop wiping the sweat from your forehead. You can take off the heavy boots. You are back in your own space now, safe, dry, comfortable. I want you to imagine the sound of that rainforest one last time, but from a distance. Not the scary, loud buzz of the day, but the soft, rhythmic hum of the night. Imagine the rain starting to fall on those millions of leaves, a gentle, steady tropical rain. Patter, 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 washing away the footprints we made, washing the dust off the gold floors, cooling the air. The pyramid is safe. It's sealed up tight. The leaves have folded over the gates. The birds are asleep in their woven nests. The entire structure is settling down for the night, just like you are. Feel your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. That tension you felt in the weavers, I'll let it go. You don't have to hold the roof up. Gravity isn't your enemy right now, it's your friend. Let it pull you down into the mattress. Let it hold you. The story is over. The history is written in resin, and it's not going anywhere. You don't have to remember the dates or the names of the trees. All you have to do is drift, like a leaf falling from the very top of the canopy, spiraling down, slow and easy, through the warm air until it lands softly on the forest floor. Rest now. The jungle will still be there in the morning.